The story begins with an ancient dragon recalling an event from 100 years ago, when a comet from another world crashed into the demon realm. He explains that, ever since then, a boy had caused great turmoil in that world, with a strange and uncontrollable power. Now that boy had finally reached the end of his journey, and the dragon, staring at the human before him, asked what desire had driven him to endure all of that and come this far. The boy, determined, replied that he only wished to return to the place from which he had been taken. The dragon, surprised by the simplicity of the request, found it both amusing and ironic that someone would risk his life for something so trivial. Yet, even though it was a wish the dragon could not directly grant, he acknowledged the human's persistence. He then revealed that the only way to return home was to use the dimensional orb, which, coincidentally, was sealed inside the dragon's own heart. The boy expressed indignation. He explained that he had searched for that orb for 100 years in that cursed world, facing endless dangers. The dragon, impatient, told him that, at the very least, he should give thanks before dying, for he himself would end the boy's useless life. But instead of surrendering, the boy began to smile. A brilliant golden aura radiated from his body, astonishing the dragon as he watched the youth's wounds rapidly heal. It didn't look like ordinary healing magic. The boy then challenged the dragon, asking if he truly intended to hand him the orb by ripping out his own heart. The dragon, now hesitant, thought such a thing impossible, for it was clear the boy was no ordinary warrior. Before he could say anything more about the strange magic, the boy had already pierced his chest and ripped out his heart with his bare hands. He apologized, saying that time had run out. That young man was Min Si-woo, known as a healer and hunter. With the dragon's heart in hand, he declared that he had finally found the long-sought dimensional orb. Even though it looked like a grotesque demonic sphere, it was what would allow him to return. Without hesitation, he swallowed it, unleashing a massive aura around him. Feeling the power fill him, he understood that the time had finally come to go back home, to his disciples and to his younger brother, and to return to Earth. Soon after, Si-woo awoke in the middle of a dense forest. Confused, he asked aloud if his tenant could hear him. A voice answered, saying it was busy vomiting because Si-woo had shaken its stomach too much. Relieved, Si-woo realized the entity had crossed with him safely. He just wished he could digest it quickly. The voice, sarcastic, said that if that happened, something incredible might occur. Impatient, Si-woo told it to shut up before he really vomited. He began to observe his surroundings, trying to confirm if he had truly returned to Earth. The voice asked if he didn't recognize his own home, but Si-woo explained that the landscape had changed too much. However, the monoflow there felt similar to what existed inside portals, making him suspect he was still in another dimension. The voice mocked him, saying he smelled like a weakling. Suddenly, Si-woo's mana began to destabilize, and he realized something was wrong. Alarmed, he feared it was the same side effect of dimensional travel he had faced 100 years earlier. Back then, when he had been torn from Earth, his stats had dropped drastically. If the same thing was happening again, he was operating at only 20% of his original power. The voice warned him that he needed to recover his strength quickly, but Si-woo recalled that last time it had taken decades. The entity complained about their contract, saying that with such weak and tainted mana, he would not be able to use his abilities effectively. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a woman ran in desperation. She had been separated from her companions and didn't know if they were safe. Although she was still on the lower floors, she was being chased by an orc. As she tried to call for help, she tripped and fell face first to the ground. In that moment of peril, Si-woo appeared before her and effortlessly defeated the orc. He approached the woman calmly and asked if they were on Earth and if this place was truly Korea. Still shaken, she confirmed it. Si-woo then asked what year it was, and she answered that it was the year 2037. Upon hearing this, he realized something astonishing. He had been dragged into the demon realm in 2027, had lived there for 100 years, but on Earth only 10 years had passed. He asked one more question, seeking confirmation: who is the current president? The woman, still bewildered by what she had seen, replied that the president was Choi Dae-soo. Min Si-woo was surprised to hear the name of the current president. In his mind, he wondered if that muscle-obsessed, one-eyed man had truly become the nation's leader. Meanwhile, the woman beside him remained frightened, unable to understand who this mysterious man was. She suspected he was either delirious or believed he had somehow traveled back in time. Trying to change the subject, Si-woo remarked the monoflow around them seemed suspicious and asked if they were inside a portal. The woman replied that they weren't, explaining that they were in what was called the tutorial tower. Puzzled by the term, Si-woo asked what it was. The woman then explained that the tower had suddenly appeared years ago and had become the gateway for all hunters. She said that by conquering the tower, a hunter could awaken their true potential, gain abilities, and depending on their performance, be recruited by prestigious guilds. guilds. The woman went on, explaining that the goal of everyone was to complete the tower as quickly as possible. Siwoo, somewhat skeptical, remarked that in his time, this was achieved naturally, without relying on towers or rituals. She retorted that this had been a privilege of the first-generation hunters. Curious, Siwoo asked if he would need to clear the tower to leave that place, and how long it usually took. The woman explained that the average time was 8 weeks, although elite hunters had managed it in 6. The absolute record was 3 weeks, achieved by the second-generation prodigy Ryuji Wan. Before they could continue their conversation, a massive tiger appeared before them. The woman identified the creature as a troll tiger and, terrified, begged him to run. Siwoo, however, was more concerned with time. He thought 3 weeks was far too long to waste there, even though he was suffering from the side effects of dimensional travel. With unstable mana and sluggish movements, he remained resolute. When the tiger attacked, Siwoo reacted with incredible speed and strength, defeating the monster with a single strike. He then declared that 5 days would be more than enough for him to finish that challenge. Elsewhere, a subordinate informed a captain that someone had just exited the tutorial tower. The name mentioned was Min Si-jun, master of the powerful Empire Guild. He remarked that it wasn't a bad performance, considering that 8 weeks had passed since his entry. However, the subordinate revealed that there was an anomaly. One of those who had left the tower was not listed in the original entry records. Intrigued, Si-jun wanted to know which group that individual belonged to, but there were no records at all. Moreover, the mysterious boy was causing massive chaos inside the tower. When Si-jun received the photo of the stranger, he was shocked. He immediately recognized who it was, his own brother. Meanwhile, back inside the tower, the girl was in complete shock. She couldn't understand how someone could complete the challenge in only 5 days. Siwoo, still recovering, explained that fighting accelerated the regeneration of his power and that he had already regained about 25% of his total strength. At that moment, a golden portal appeared before them. The girl begged him to wait, but Siwoo simply crossed through, leaving the tower behind. Outside, a few men noticed the unusual movement. One of them commented that the portal had opened, but something seemed off. When they saw the two emerge, one of the men recognized the girl as someone familiar. He approached to understand what was going on. He was the leader of Section 2. An employee informed him that the two had exited the portal, but the boy was not on the entry list. This made the leader suspicious. To him, it was strange for someone to leave the tower without a single scratch on their body. It made no sense. He suspected that Siwoo had awakened an extremely powerful ability, perhaps something related to camouflage or disguise. Determined to clarify things, the man ordered everyone to step back. He wanted to speak directly with Siwoo. Approaching, he asked who he was and why he wasn't on any official records of the tower. Siwoo answered simply, saying he hadn't entered through the conventional entrance. The man grew even more confused, asking how someone could leave the tower without ever entering it. Unfazed, Siwoo only said that things had just happened that way. The man concluded that he had surely awakened some absurd skill, likely disguise, and warned that if he didn't want to die, he had better stop putting on that little show. The voice inside Min Siwoo spoke urgently, urging him to finish that man quickly. The leader of Section 2, increasingly irritated, began to lose control. He glared at Siwoo with hatred, shouting that he would wipe that smile off his face. With the same provoking calm, Siwoo replied that it seemed the man's ass was jealous of his mouth, since only crap was coming out of it. That drove the leader completely insane, and he swore he would kill Siwoo. But the young man only provoked him once more, telling him to shut up and come at him already, and to stop breathing with his mouth open, because his breath was disgusting. Furious, the leader charged with his subordinates. Yet, with a single swift and precise movement, Siwoo defeated them all. The strike was so fast that no one could react. By the time the others realized it, the attackers were already on the ground, completely defeated. The witnesses, stunned, asked what had just happened and who had done it. One of them commented that it was the same individual who had been causing trouble earlier, but he had vanished right afterward. When they reviewed the security footage, they realized that Siwoo was so fast he hadn't even been recorded. His movement was so quick that not a single frame captured his action. Some suspected he had a stealth ability, but Min Si-jun disagreed. To him, it wasn't stealth at all, but pure speed. He was certain that boy was his brother. The face, the posture, even the way he acted. It was exactly how Siwoo had been 10 years earlier. Convinced, Si-jun ordered all members of the Empire Guild to be mobilized to track Siwoo. However, he made it clear, no one was to capture him. It was to be made clear that the boy was under Min Si-jun's protection. Everyone left quickly, while Si-jun remained thoughtful, wondering where his brother had been all this time. He considered whether Siwoo had been kidnapped or forced to disappear, but believed there must be an explanation. After all, if he had been in Korea, Si-jun would have found him already. Now he needed to think, where would Siwoo go first in a situation like this? At that moment, the woman who had left the tower alongside Siwoo appeared before him. Sejun immediately recognized her and asked if she had just come out of the tutorial tower. The girl confirmed, explaining that she had done absolutely nothing to escape. It was thanks to Siwoo's help that she had survived. Even so, both of them had awakened, and that was what mattered. Sejun understood that if she had exited earlier than expected, it was because she had awakened a high-level ability. She replied that she didn't know if her ability was really that good, but she had received a rank A skill. Seeing her potential, Sejun thought it would be an excellent idea to recruit her immediately. He told her she would receive the best possible offers, granting her a place in the Empire Guild. The proposal surprised her, as it was a great honor to be invited by one of the largest guilds in the country. However, at that moment, a new man appeared, criticizing the guild's stance. He said that, for an organization called Empire, they were acting more like thieves. Sejun grew irritated at the provocation and demanded that the other watch his words. The man in question was Ryu Jiwan, a rank S hunter and master of the Diamond Guild. At his side was another rank S hunter, Choi Songgil, leader of the White Lion Guild. Songgil remarked that perhaps he had lost the chance to find the new talent, since everyone had been alerted by the association. He spoke of the guards who had been completely defeated by a single individual and asked if that destruction was the work of the unregistered awakened person mentioned by the association. Jiwan considered that man extremely bold to cause such chaos right after leaving the tower. Songgil agreed, saying they needed to find him as soon as possible. From the state of things, he judged that the new awakened one possessed an extremely high-level ability and needed to be recruited before another guild did. Honestly, Songgil declared that he wanted the boy for his own team. Jiwan, without hesitation, said that whoever found him first would keep him, and if force was needed in the process, he wouldn't mind. Min Sejun silently only observed the guild's movements. He knew his brother was powerful, but now everyone was after him like a rare prize. Songgil then ordered preparations for the search. There was no time to lose. He said that if anyone found the boy, they were to notify the others immediately. Before leaving, he handed his card to the girl, promising that she would receive high-level offers and could choose whichever guild she wanted. Finally, Ryu Jiwan reinforced that when he found Siwoo, he would inform the others, though his gaze made it clear that he intended far more than just reporting. Sejun assured them that he would never let something like that happen to them. Afterward, a man named Jinsik approached Jiwan and asked if the conversation had been productive. Meanwhile, Jiwan gave a new order. He wanted all of Diamond's rank C hunters to be gathered and organized into a search party. Their mission was to locate a very important person, Sejun's younger brother. Elsewhere, Siwoo's inner voice remarked that after 100 years away from Earth, the first place he visited was a fried chicken fast food restaurant. Siwoo simply told the voice to try it before judging. After the first bite, the voice admitted it was delicious, wondering how anyone could live so long without it, even questioning whether fried chicken had been created by the gods. Soon after, the scene shifted to Siwoo walking down the streets. The voice asked where he was going, and Siwoo replied that he was heading home. When he arrived in front of a house, the voice questioned if that place was really his home. Siwoo confirmed and opened the door. At that instant, he was struck by a flashback of his childhood. He remembered his parents waiting for him with a smile, asking why he was late and if he was hungry. The house, once full of joy and life, was now abandoned, covered in filth, cobwebs, and bottles scattered everywhere. Siwoo sat in silence, reflecting that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember his parents' faces. Some people say forgetting is a blessing granted by the gods, but to him, it was a curse. During the 100 years he had spent in the demon realm, fighting battle after battle on a blood-soaked, unfamiliar planet, his humanity had been fading away. He feared that everything that sustained his existence, his memories, would also vanish. That was why he clung desperately to the memories he still had. His younger brother, his disciples, the promises he had made. Those memories had never turned into simple longing, but yet had become an obsession and a weight of regret. Still, they were what kept him alive through it all. The voice remarked that the house looked so lonely it made even the demon realm seem more welcoming. Siwoo thought that, thanks to that inner presence, he had been able to endure everything. He added, unfortunately, that there was no fried chicken there. The voice admitted he had a good point and couldn't argue back. Siwoo stood up, saying he would take one last look before leaving. It was time to search for the others, and he wondered how they were after 10 years. At that moment, a man appeared unexpectedly, saying that he had finally found Siwoo. He explained that it had been very difficult to track him and declared that he must be the bastard who escaped the tower. He introduced himself as Beyond Hak Moon, a rank C hunter of Diamond, and asked if Siwoo had any idea what he had gone through to get there. Siwoo replied with disinterest, asking if he wanted a reward. Irritated, Hakmun said he was from Diamond and that Siwoo should take it seriously. Siwoo, however, remained indifferent. Then Hakmun asked if he wanted wanted to end up in a wheelchair. Provocatively, Siwoo responded with irony, wondering who had taught a chimpanzee to speak like that, even questioning whether orangutans could become hunters these days. He realized how much the world had changed while he was gone. Overcome with rage, Hawkman promised to teach him some manners and lunged forward. He managed to land a strong blow on Siwoo, knocking him to the ground. His subordinates laughed, saying Siwoo hadn't even taken his hands out of his pockets before fainting. At that moment, a system window appeared before Siwoo, notifying him of the awakening of a skill called Lightning Step, a rank C technique that boosted his movement speed by over 100% depending on his body's endurance. The inner voice commented that this was the first skill absorbed since returning to Earth. Siwoo quickly stood up and appeared behind Hawkmoon. With a single blow, he smashed his head against the ground. He then stretched out his hand and declared it was time for the Predator's meal. A magic symbol appeared beneath his feet. The system confirmed that the Predator skill had been activated and that the extraction had succeeded. Siwoo was satisfied to see that he could still use that technique in this world. The inner voice compared the usefulness of the skill to the taste of fried chicken. One of the men witnessing the scene shouted, ordering them to attack immediately. Siwoo then decided to test his new skill and activated Lightning Step. In just seconds, he defeated nearly all of the enemies. With only one left, he finished the fight with a knee strike to the opponent's stomach. The system then announced that the new extracted skill was Vital Strike, also ranked C. The newly acquired ability allowed Siwoo to instantly see his opponent's weak points, making him far more efficient with weapons. Picking up a knife, he commented that the blade was extremely dull, and that a real swordsman should at least fight with a sharp weapon. Even so, he decided to keep the knife and advanced toward a man, pressing the blade against his neck. At that moment, Siwoo looked back and was stunned by an unexpected presence. The person standing there watching everything was none other than his own brother, Si-jun. Seeing each other again after so long, both were deeply moved. Immediately afterward, an explanation revealed the events of the past. 20 years earlier, the world had plunged into chaos when portals began to open on Earth, releasing violent monsters into the human world. It was also the first time the so-called awakened appeared, people whose abilities blossomed in the presence of portals. It was a barbaric era when everyone was still inexperienced, with no policies or laws to deal with it. In this lawless world, the two brothers, who had lost their parents at a young age, had to fight to survive. The elder brother, Siwoo, was one of the first to awaken. He dropped out of school and became a hunter to support Si-jun, who was still a child. One morning in the past, little Si-jun asked if his brother would go to school that day. Siwoo replied that he wouldn't, because he had to work. Si-jun felt guilty, thinking it was because of him, but Siwoo assured him it wasn't. He said he simply wasn't good at studying, and would decide his career later. Si-jun then asked when his brother would come home, but Siwoo only told him not to worry, because he would be back soon. Back in the present, Siwoo went to his brother's house, and was amazed by the place. The residence was huge and very beautiful. He felt happy and curious, wondering if Si-jun had bought it all without taking loans. Si-jun explained that it was nothing, that he had earned that money thanks to the skills he had learned from his own brother. He had bought that house with the thought of the two of them living together from then on. There was even a room reserved especially for Siwoo. Even so, Si-jun was still in shock. After years of searching, he had never been able to find his brother, and now he suddenly reappeared right before his eyes. Siwoo, smiling as he saw the room prepared for him, said that raising his brother had been worth it. Observing Siwoo's expression, Si-jun remarked that he was the one who had gone through hardships, and that such silly talk could only come from his brother. He wanted to know if Siwoo had any idea how much he had searched for him, and where he had been all this time. Siwoo then invited him to sit down, saying he had a century's worth of history to tell. And so, he began to explain. Years ago, at the exact moment he defeated the fourth demon lord, he was transported to another dimension by an artifact of the very enemy he had slain. In this new dimension, he met a creature called Predator, capable of extracting abilities from other beings. He spent 100 years growing stronger with this ability, seeking a dragon with dimensional magic. Eventually, he found the demon dragon, fought an intense battle, and managed to defeat it. Inside the creature's heart was a dimensional orb, which he used to return to Earth. Siwoo confirmed that all of this was true. The Predator had come with him and, at that very moment, was inside his body. Still trying to understand, Si-jun asked if that was like a possession, but Siwoo explained it was more like a parasite. Hearing this, the Predator was offended and asked if he wanted to urinate blood for speaking badly of him. Siwoo then asked his brother to believe him, even if it sounded like madness. Without hesitation, Si-jun affirmed that he believed him. In the world they lived in, things like this were no longer impossible. The only thing that mattered was that Siwoo had returned. In response, Siwoo said that now it was his brother's turn to explain what had happened over the last 10 years. He mentioned that, surprisingly, the The one who became president was Choi Dae-soo. Si-jun confirmed it. After Si-woo's disappearance, Choi Dae-soo had stolen all the credit for defeating the fourth demon lord. Choi Dae-soo became president with the title God of War, recognized as the strongest hunter of the first generation, though his reputation had been fabricated. Now, even in power, he continued creating policies that permanently harmed the guild of his former group. He often wondered what he would do when he discovered that his only rival had returned. Meanwhile, Min Se-woo said that this outcome had been predictable. He considered the title of only SS rank hunter in Korea to be a joke. He questioned whether the members of the Diamond Guild were Choi Dae-soo's subordinates, but his brother clarified they were not. He explained that Choi Dae-soo's guild was called Infinite Great Numbers. Currently, there were 7 major guilds representing South Korea, collectively known as Epitrauma. Among them were the Empire itself, where Si-jun served, and the Diamond Guild, led by Ryu Ji-hwan, a second-generation hunter considered treacherous. Si-jun assured his brother that he would personally resolve the problem that had occurred that day. Si-woo then asked what had happened to Si-jun's former disciples. He replied that they had all gone their separate ways and hadn't spoken in years. Sholan had returned to his homeland, while Manhwa had allied himself with Choi Dae-soo's guild. This surprised Si-woo, but he quickly asked about Min-jun. At that moment, Si-jun revealed that Min-jun had been murdered, leaving Si-woo shocked and curious about the circumstances of his death. Si-jun explained that Min-jun's body had vanished and that no one had been able to identify the culprit. Since only hunters or awakened beings could kill another hunter, even the international organization HMCS took part in the investigation, but without success. Si-woo asked what this organization was, and Si-jun explained that the HMCS was a special investigative unit focused on crimes committed by hunters. They had the authority to investigate and arrest awakened criminals, functioning as a sort of specialized police force. When Si-woo asked if his brother had any contacts inside, Si-jun replied that he did, but questioned if Si-woo was planning to infiltrate the unit. He also said that if it was just information he needed, the guild's intelligence team would be more suitable, since the HMCS was a dangerous place. Nevertheless, Si-woo said he needed more than just information. Si-jun tried to warn him, saying that although hunters were combatants, the cases investigated there involved serious crimes like murder, and that it was far too soon to get involved in something so risky. He suggested that since Si-woo had just returned, he should rest and recover his combat instinct. However, Si-woo replied that he had fought for 100 years in another world, and that during that time, he had done everything possible. Upon hearing this, Si-jun recalled his brother's old nickname and realized that although his face was the same, his aura was completely different. He concluded that something very serious must have happened in that other world. Since Si-woo was determined, Si-jun accepted it and said he could put him in contact with Lee Yeji, manager of the Frost Soul Guild, who worked directly with the HMCS. As Si-woo searched for clues, he claimed to recognize a familiar face. Si-jun asked to see who it was and upon looking, identified the man as Hwang Jung-gu, leader of the Gangbuk district team. He was a veteran hunter between the first and second generations and asked if Si-woo knew him, but Si-woo said that was not the man's real name. At that moment, the scene shifted to 2 days later at the HMCS headquarters in the Gangbuk district office. There, an older man was furious, complaining about the second-generation recruits placed on his team through recommendations. He said they all had rotten minds. Just like the rest of that generation, he considered useless. He compared them to his own time, when the hunter world was ruled by the law of the strongest and by true leadership. He asked if he had ever told them that he almost died during a raid 10 years ago, and another man, bored, thought he had heard that story at least 768 times. Still, the leader demanded that he listen again, saying that when he was a rookie, he had been gravely wounded during a mission, and that this had shaped who he was today. The group had fallen into despair after losing their main forces. It was at that moment that a hunter with exceptional abilities appeared and saved one of the men using incredible healing powers. Soon after, Min Se-woo burst in, kicking the door open and calling the man Byung-gu, asking why he had changed his name and if he remembered who had saved him. Upon seeing Si-woo, Byung-gu was visibly terrified. The scene then shifted again. Byung-gu, now presenting himself as Jung-gu, introduced a new hunter named Hu as part of the Gangbuk district team. As a newcomer, he probably did not know much about how things worked there. Jung-gu explained that if he had any doubts, he should ask them now, and requested that the veterans treat the new member with proper respect. One of the women present remarked that this seemed contradictory and questioned what was wrong with the great team leader, Hwang Jung-gu. However, one of the men asked for silence, explaining explaining that the rookie was not an ordinary person. At that moment, Jung-gu called Kim Soon and asked her to accompany him to the conference room, where they would hold an introductory briefing for the new member. People began to wonder if the three-star hunter had joined the newcomer. The scene shifted again. Jung-gu showed the field uniform and asked Si-woo what his size was. At that moment, Kim Seung-ah, data manager of the gangbook team, commented that she wasn't sure what to do with that man. Si-woo replied that he wanted to obtain a simplified summary with information on hunters who had died in the past 20 years. Kim Seung-ah explained that it was too much information to gather immediately, especially since they were also preparing a report for the Hunter Association. Jung-gu, however, told her not to underestimate herself, as he trusted she was capable of doing it. He also told Si-woo not to worry, because they would soon have enough data. Then he asked if Si-woo wanted to include information on human limits, but Si-woo replied that all he needed were cases officially recognized as murders by the HMCS, as well as a list of hunter assassins who had never been captured. Si-woo reflected that it was practically impossible to kill an awakened individual without being awakened oneself. If someone had killed a hunter as high-ranked as Min-jun, the culprit could only have been a professional assassin. Even if that criminal had been captured or killed, there would still be records if he was awakened. From that moment on, his top priority became Sharada. Kim Seung-ah then asked where she should send the data, and Si-woo requested that everything be forwarded to his phone. At that moment, one of the men from the team arrived saying he needed to speak to the leader, as they had received a request for support from the police. There was a territorial war between gang members and awakened individuals, and the local police were unable to handle the situation. Jung-gu asked if the police couldn't solve it themselves, since the people involved seemed to be low level. The man explained that they couldn't, because one of those involved belonged to Cerberus. Si-woo then asked what that organization was, and Kim Seung-ah answered that Cerberus was very different from ordinary gangs. They were arms dealers, contract killers, and there were even rumors about hunter trafficking. It was understandable that the police couldn't face them. With that, Si-woo showed interest and asked Byung-gu to take him to the scene. Byung-gu, insisting that his name was now Jung-gu, said that Si-woo knew that. However, since he kept calling him Byung-gu, he decided to accept that name again. Still, he reminded Si-woo that, as a rookie, he needed at least some basic training. Elsewhere in the city, a man remarked that the captain of the Bloodless Reaper's action was nothing special, especially compared to Cerberus's shield. That man's name was Gang Ho, the organization's second in command. At his side was Jikian, a red-haired man and Cerberus's third in command. Jikin claimed that half of their enemies had already been defeated by his six-cut sword technique. Gang Ho mocked the statement, asking why Jikin didn't just try attacking him instead. But Jikin replied that one day he certainly would defeat him. Gang Ho provocatively asked what they could do without him, saying that he had made the right choice by abandoning his hunter career and joining the organization from the start. According to him, Cerberus's boss knew how to recognize talent. He then declared that, from that moment on, that territory belonged to Cerberus. But before they could act, they were caught off guard by a sudden attack, followed by a huge explosion. Jikin was confused, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. He turned to Gang Ho and asked if he had been the one to kill those people, since things would get very complicated if they had messed with the HMCS. But Gang Ho, feigning ignorance, replied that he didn't really know, though he admitted he would have to clean up the mess. At that instant, Min Soo-woo appeared, stating it was very likely that they had killed some hunters earlier. He asked them to show a little more of what they were capable of, but everyone began protesting, claiming they had never seen that man before and questioning how he dared show up alone. As soon as Si-woo appeared, Gang Ho attacked him with a violent blow to the skull. He clearly heard the sound of bones breaking and thought it strange, since he was certain he had crushed his opponent's head. Consumed by rage, Gang Ho swore he would send Si-woo to the next life and activated his full-body armor ability. However, as he charged again, he suddenly saw a vision of his grandfather. Confused, he tried to understand what was happening, since moments before he had been fighting. When the vision passed, he realized he was lying on the ground, crying. Si-woo then grabbed him by the hair and forced him to stand, reminding him that he was the only one left alive there. He then ordered Predator to devour that ability, and the creature replied that it tasted delicious. Unable to believe what had happened, Gang Ho wondered how they had been defeated by just one man. Still stunned, he said that Si-woo wasn't a real officer and asked why he was going that far. He insisted they didn't know anything and weren't real hunters, only laborers. Si-woo replied that he already knew that, since trash like them would never be capable of doing anything truly significant. Gang Ho, confused, asked why he was doing all this, and Si-woo revealed that he only wanted to test the abilities of the awakened criminals of today. It was then that Byung-gu appeared, asking if Si-woo was alright. He was shocked to see that Si-woo had defeated everyone alone. Si-woo confirmed that he had killed them all, leaving only the leader alive. Byung-gu was even more frightened by this revelation, saying that their priority was arrests, but that this kind of action was allowed if they were attacked first. Even so, he thought those enemies were cruel enough to justify executions, but killing them all was excessive. What was even more striking was that they had all died with indifferent expressions. Byung-gu reflected that Siwoo had always been known as the Mad Dog, but he didn't remember him being this brutal. Siwoo commented that he had forgotten to turn on his body camera, which was normal since he was still in training, and asked if Byung-gu could handle the paperwork for him. Crying, Byung-gu replied that he would. Meanwhile, hidden in the shadows, a man made a phone call. He reported that Cerberus had been completely exterminated without offering any resistance. He informed that the second-in-command, Gang Ho, had been crushed in a humiliating way, and that the third-in-command, Jiken, had also been killed by those men. The call was for Gert, a high-ranking hunter of the Red Light Guild from Hong Kong. He asked exactly who had died. The scene shifted to another location, where some men were saying that Gert had just arrived from the Hong Kong headquarters. One of them, named Lee Jun from the Korean Hunter Association, greeted him formally. Gert asked where the body was. Lee Jun explained that the body of the suspect Jiken was buried at the Hunter Forensic Department and suggested that he go there to confirm the identity before heading to his assigned lodging. However, Gert said the whole thing seemed very suspicious, as he had heard rumors that the one who killed Jiken was, in fact, someone from the HMCS itself. The men simply said they could not answer questions about the case. When Gert asked if it was possible to leave his lodging before the permitted time, he was told that it was impossible. Any unauthorized departure would violate the international hunter law, which could lead to forced deportation, disciplinary sanctions, and other penalties. With that, he was informed that he would be escorted to the forensic department. Gert was very irritated with the situation. He had only come there to pay his respects and planned to leave shortly after, but everything had gotten out of control. Furious, he ordered Liu Yanfang to hunt down whoever was responsible for this. Liu, a B-rank hunter and also a member of the Crimson Guild, specialized in stealth and tracking. Consumed by rage, Gert swore he would personally kill the man who had taken Jiken's life. Meanwhile, Siwoo asked his brother if he had mentioned that Minjun's belongings had been stolen. Sijun confirmed it. About 2 days earlier, Minjun had been murdered and his house completely looted. Since a hunter's mana works like a fingerprint, it was possible to identify the type, code, and even classification of an individual through it. At the time of the investigation, the designated hunters assumed that the criminal had taken everything in order to erase all traces. Since Minjun was only an archaeologist, his house was full of materials related to his profession, and not a single object carrying his mana was left. Siwoo questioned whether it was just a common robbery or if there was something more behind it, because the list of missing items included many valuable things. If the place had been ransacked so thoroughly, the chance of leaving evidence behind was high, and if the true goal had been to erase mana traces, burning everything would have been more effective. Sijun asked if he was suggesting that the thief had broken into the house after the murder. Siwoo replied that he had already analyzed the case and noticed similarities with other incidents. That was why he said he might need to investigate some fence handlers. Sijun, however, reminded him that the case was already old and Minjun's belongings were most likely lost. But Siwoo insisted, saying he would only know the truth by personally tracking it down. The scene then shifted to the moment when Siwoo set out to investigate, as he had promised his brother. However, he was no longer so confident. As he walked, he wondered why there were so many thieves in such a small country. Predator, who was accompanying him, said he sensed something and suggested taking the right path. Siwoo obeyed but soon saw it was a dead end and complained about Predator's bad intuition. At that moment, he heard some male voices nearby. On the other side, some men were talking. One of them said that the HMCS had been eliminating all the fence handlers lately. They said both the Yongdongpo and Yan areas had been completely cleared the day before. Another man found it strange, since an operation like that, without a report or warrant, didn't make sense. But a third explained that the HMCS had investigative authority over hunters on a global scale, including the right to eliminate criminals without trial. Any resistance to them could result in imprisonment. A mustached man commented that, despite everything, they were still just public officials. He didn't understand why everyone was afraid of a stranger just because he had killed someone. Another replied that, although being a hunter in a guild earned much more money, within the HMCS there were hardly any high-ranking hunters. However, the man behind all of that seemed to be completely insane, especially because he was dealing with stolen goods from hunters. That was why they decided it was time to move the warehouse. It was then that Siwoo appeared, saying they would find the new warehouse and that he himself would take charge of learning everything. The men were terrified when they realized that this was the man who had been eliminating fence manipulators. The mustached man ordered everyone to run to Section 2, declaring it an emergency. Siwoo then appeared again and demanded that they tell him where the warehouse was if they didn't want to die. The criminals were frightened frightened, knowing they didn't stand a chance in a fight. But at that moment, more men arrived and began shouting, asking what was going on. One of them accused Siwoo of posing as a fake police officer. The mustache man said it didn't matter if he was from the HMCS. If they sealed him inside a block of concrete and threw him into the sea, no one would ever find him. Siwoo, staring at all of them, said that since they were all gathered, it was a perfect opportunity to take them all down at once. Then he decided to use an ability he hadn't used in a long time. The Predator said that to activate that ability, a chicken had to be offered. Siwoo agreed, saying the deal was set. Thus, Siwoo activated his shockwave ability, electrocuting all the enemies present. With only one man left, trembling in fear, Siwoo asked if he wasn't going to show him where the warehouse was. The man, shaking, asked who he was. The answer came sharp and clear. Siwoo said his identity was the crazy bastard. Shifting scenes, Siwoo had managed to tie up all the criminals. The Predator, named Frey, commented that his intuition had been excellent, but Siwoo replied impatiently, telling him to shut up, saying it was all just luck. Frey then asked if that was the mana they were looking for, and Siwoo confirmed. It was a very familiar energy, which was why he recognized it immediately. The mana came from a research book that belonged to Minjun. He noticed that a security spell had been cast upon the book, but it wasn't an ordinary seal. It was a magic that only opened with the true owner's mana. However, Siwoo said he didn't need to read the contents. He only needed to extract the mana within it. Quickly, he called Byung-gu, reporting that he had captured a dozen awakened criminals and asked for someone to come pick them up, since he urgently needed to head elsewhere. The scene shifted again, revealing a collection point for special type abilities, a place where dark arts and bizarre techniques were allowed. This neutral combat zone, where everything related to abilities was traded, was called Black Skyfall. Inside a house at that place, a woman manipulated cards. Drawing one, she said it seemed a guest was about to arrive. She was one of the 10 leaders under the great sorcerer Mujin in Black Skyfall. Back to Siwoo, he observed the place and remarked that it hadn't changed much compared to 10 years ago. Frey asked if he was famous there, since everyone was staring at him and people's abilities looked very strange. Siwoo explained that the place was a neutral combat zone, and if anyone stirred up trouble, things could get complicated quickly. At that moment, the woman appeared, saying it had been a long time since she last saw Siwoo, and that she had been waiting all these years for their reunion. Inside the house, she commented that 10 years had passed, yet he remained the same. Siwoo replied that she hadn't changed at all either. She wanted to know what had happened during all that time, why he never contacted her again. Siwoo answered that it would be hard to explain and preferred to get straight to the point. He asked her to extract the mana contained in Minjun's book. Smiling, Moomyong said he was still as straightforward as always, and that was what she liked most about him. She asked if he remembered how the process worked. Siwoo then took a knife, lightly cut his own hand, and explained that mana manifests through abilities or magic. Turning it back into pure mana was nearly impossible. He compared it to cooking potato and carrot curry. Once prepared, it was no longer possible to recover the original ingredients. What made the impossible possible was Moomyong's ability, known as mana rarefaction, a unique technique called Mom. This ability belonged to a group of supernatural practices considered illegal: mediumship, manipulation of causality, effects that violated the laws of nature. People with such gifts were often closely monitored by the authorities of that world. After the ritual, Moomyong said the process was complete. She seemed to savor the energy as if tasting the very force of life dancing on her tongue. Frey, watching everything, said her ability was disgusting. Siwoo, however, thanked her, took the vial with the extracted mana, and prepared to leave. She was surprised at his haste and remarked that he had always been a very mysterious boy. Inside the car, Frey remained annoyed. He said he found that place extremely unpleasant and never wanted to go back. Siwoo asked why he was being so picky that day. Frey replied that he and Moomyong seemed like two perverts, and changing the subject, asked what the next destination was. Siwoo said they were heading to the Institute of Ancient History Research, the place where Minjun had been murdered. Frey commented that now that he possessed power, it seemed like he could storm any place. But Siwoo explained that it wasn't exactly like that, since the building belonged to the Empire Guild. Fortunately, Sejun had bought and preserved the place from the start. Even so, Minjun's death was still something difficult to accept. Arriving at the site, Siwoo knelt on the ground and said he needed to see the memories of that day. He then activated his mana remembrance ability, projecting before him a hologram of the past events. Frey noted that the mana left there was so faint he could barely see it. However, he reasoned that Minjun was never a weak hunter, which indicated that the culprit was extremely skilled. In the hologram, Minjun appeared sitting on the ground with a hooded figure in in front of him. Minjun asked if the person was a VIP of the command, but the hooded one replied that his rank was much higher than that. Siwoo began to suspect whether Minjun had been part of some organization beyond the research institute. Frey remarked that in the demon world, Seo always talked about his younger brother and his disciples, and even after 100 years, he had never forgotten them. But now, having seen a disciple die right before his eyes, Siwoo didn't even show the slightest reaction. Frey questioned whether he had a heart of steel. Standing up, Siwoo replied that Frey's vocabulary was expanding day by day and asked where he was learning so many new words. Frey commented that even though his own stomach was boiling with emotions, Siwoo showed nothing outwardly, or perhaps he simply couldn't. Siwoo answered that it was fine after all. 100 years was more than enough to let go of all that. At that moment, a man appeared asking if his name was Miss Hu, and, without waiting for an answer, told him to follow silently since someone was desperately waiting to see him. Siwoo quickly noticed that several people were with the man and remarked that it was better to introduce his 6 rats right away. The man smirked and replied that he was very perceptive, which made things easier. He said that first, he would tie his hands and feet quietly, and if he resisted, he would be dragged by force. When the men tried to restrain him, Siwoo immediately reacted, slicing one of them in half, saying that cutting suited his style better. It was then that Gert appeared, declaring that from that moment he would take over, since Siwoo was his prey. He accused Siwoo of having killed his only brother, Jikin. Frey commented that Gert was the most decent one he had seen so far, and that his abilities seemed truly appetizing. Siwoo, unfazed, replied that he didn't even remember who was who, since he usually didn't bother asking the names of the trash he cleaned up. That made Gert even more furious, shouting that he would tear out his heart. Gert's first strike was blocked by Siwoo, who remarked that it wasn't bad at all for a rank A hunter. Gert, surprised, saw his opponent's arm regenerate instantly. His subordinates were shocked to see him block their captain's attack, but before they could react, Siwoo appeared before them and ordered them not to interfere. He activated his sudden fire ability and, with absurd speed, grabbed one of the men by the neck. The others began to wonder how a healer could use acceleration, questioning what the true identity of that lunatic was. Gert noticed that Siwoo dodged his attacks with the bare minimum of movement, and no acceleration ability demonstrated such precision. He finally realized that Siwoo was no ordinary opponent, and that he would have to give his all in that battle. Siwoo then said he had been wrong about one thing. He stated that when someone commits a crime, it doesn't matter if it's a brother or a father, that person must be punished. He added that if Jikin had died in combat, then he was probably an awakened criminal, so his death wasn't unjust. The only people with the right to feel wronged were those harmed by him. Gert, irritated, told him to stop spouting nonsense. He said Siwoo knew nothing about his brother's life, that he had become a criminal out of necessity to support him when they were young. He swore Siwoo would pay for everything he had done and activated his Heavenly Slaughter Fang ability. Siwoo realized he couldn't dodge that strike and warned Frey that they would have to use a joint ability. Frey complained, saying they were already working overtime and he was getting tired, but he agreed to use the technique once more. Siwoo promised it would be the last time and that he could rest afterward. Thus, Siwoo activated his neutralization ability, completely dispelling Gert's magic before him. Liu Yanfeng was shocked to see that, realizing Siwoo had nullified the ability of a rank A hunter. He concluded it was best to forget about any revenge plans since 4 of his men were already dead. Siwoo argued that many people had gone through hardships similar to Jikin's without becoming criminals. According to him, that was just an excuse from someone with rotten character. He then delivered a powerful kick to Gert. Gert's men tried to intervene, but he ordered them to stay back. Thinking to himself, he concluded that maintaining such a level of ability for so long was impossible. If Siwoo really were a healer, his endurance would be high, but his mana would soon run out. He decided then to finish the fight in close combat and explode his Heavenly Slaughter Fang with concentrated fire. But the moment he tried to attack, Siwoo easily dodged, grabbed him by the hair, and began pummeling him mercilessly. Gert managed to push him back and ordered Liu Yanfeng to restrain him quickly. Using his chain ability, Liu Yanfeng successfully immobilized Siwoo. Gert approached and said he would destroy his body completely so that he could no longer heal. However, Siwoo broke free from the chains, congratulated the two of them for becoming criminal brothers, and activated his life drain ability, an SS rank technique. He quickly began draining all of Gert's life force. Liu Yanfeng, panicking, wondered how a healer could use such a powerful ability. But Siwoo made it clear that he had never been an ordinary healer. Instead of healing with common mana, he manipulated people's very life force. He was a true artist of the spirit of life. Terrified, Liu Yanfeng said he couldn't resist. But before he could say more, Siwoo knocked him out with a clean strike, telling him to shut up. With everyone defeated, Siwoo realized he had cleaned up the situation quickly. The first thing he did was check if the camera was working properly. Then he asked Byung-gu if he could see everything clearly this time. This time, Siwoo wasn't the one to throw the first punch, so everything was considered self-defense. The people watching his fight were utterly horrified. Everyone was commenting on how truly impressive that man was. However, Byung-gu realized he had made a serious mistake. Instead of pressing the record button, he had started a live broadcast. More than 5,000 people were watching everything in real time. Meanwhile, elsewhere, some men were discussing that broadcast. They commented that the video had not been in the organization's plans and that it represented a failed test project. They also mentioned that HMCS did not have the capability to produce such a high-quality video. That meant someone very talented had joined HMCS, and that video was indeed authentic. But no one could understand why someone with that level of skill would be involved with them. A woman remarked that this was exactly the problem. The most troubling part of all was that the person killed during that broadcast had been the hunter Gert from Hong Kong's Crimson Light Guild. Even though, according to HMCS's current laws, Siwoo had not violated any rules, his actions were still considered extremely brutal. At that moment, a man appeared, asking who was responsible for everything. This man was Choi Dae-soo, the current president of the Republic of Korea. A few days later, the scene shifted to the Empire Guild cafeteria. Si-jun asked his brother if he was all right, referring to the live broadcast, but noticed that he seemed distracted. While eating, almost choking, Siwoo replied that he was paying attention, even though he was focused on the food. Frey complained, saying even dogs were less noisy when they ate, and told Siwoo to shut up and eat his pork chop. Siwoo praised the quality of the food, saying the cafeteria was really good and asked if he could eat there every day. Si-jun replied that he could, but demanded that he listen to his explanation first. He said that the video of the live broadcast in which Hunter Gert appeared was being suppressed. That was a relief, since the footage recorded by the body camera was too shaky and Siwoo's face hadn't been revealed. However, if Choi Dae-soo were to find out that Siwoo had returned, the situation would become very complicated, especially because Siwoo had not yet fully recovered from the side effects of his return. Considering everything Choi Dae-soo had done over the past 10 years to erase Siwoo's records, Si-jun said that for now his brother should keep a low profile. Even so, Siwoo answered that it was fine, and if it was to reassure him, he would stay quiet this time. He only asked that his brother eat in peace. Si-jun retorted, saying he was no longer a child, as he was nearly 30 years old. But Siwoo countered, saying that, to him, his brother still looked like a little kid with a runny nose. At that moment, a woman who had come out of the tutorial tower along with Siwoo appeared. He asked who she was and why she knew him. Si-jun explained that her name was Shinji Su, and that she was now part of the guild as a new member. She commented that she had only awakened her rank ability thanks to Siwoo. Si-jun said that Hunter Siwoo, who was now with Miss Ji-soo, had probably taken part in a new hunter's seminar at the guild. Seok Tae-jin confirmed and introduced himself. He was a member of the Empire Guild and said he was glad to finally meet Siwoo, since he had heard a lot about him. He also remarked on how active Siwoo had been at HMCS and asked that he continue dedicating himself in the future. Just then, Chu Ha-min appeared, asking if Siwoo was the rookie who had been causing trouble. He said he had seen the video of Siwoo killing Gert and revealed that Gert had been his rival. Even so, he remarked that the video looked fake. Tae-jin questioned the reason behind such aggressive behavior, and Si-jun scolded Ha-min, saying he was being far too arrogant for someone meeting others for the first time. He told him to lower his tone. Offended, Ha-min said he couldn't even ask a simple question, and that everyone there was too strict. Tae-jin then asked if he had gone crazy to say such a thing, and added that the leader of the White Dragon Guild would certainly be very disappointed to hear that kind of remark. Ha-min questioned whether Siwoo planned to keep gossiping with the higher-ups, since he was a higher-ranked hunter. He claimed to be a direct disciple of the leader of the Black Narcissus Guild, Xiaolong, and commented that, originally, Siwoo's brother had liked him very much. However, Siwoo replied that that was enough, asking him not to make so much noise. He also said that if Ha-min wanted to confirm anything, he should test it with his own eyes. Observing the other's behavior, Siwoo said it looked like Ha-min's master had failed both in his character and education, but he was curious to see if at least he had taught him how to fight properly. Those words infuriated Ha-min, who wondered how Siwoo dared to mention his master's name that way. He thought that if they weren't inside another guild's building, he would have attacked Siwoo right then. In the end, he only warned him to be very careful on his way home that night. Meanwhile, the others present apologized to the guild leader for what had happened, but Si-jun said it was fine, they could go, and asked his brother not to worry. He said he would handle that guy himself and would still receive millions of won from the White Lion as compensation for material damages. However, Siwoo asked him to let it go, since Ha-min was hiding. As he was only a disciple of a disciple, Siwoo thought it best to let him slip away. At that moment, the scene shifted to a man named Bak Jian-ho, manager of HMCS's Korean branch. He said he was honored by the visit of none other than the White Lion's leader, Choi Sung-il. Despite his busy schedule, Choi Sung-il, the guild leader, replied that he wished to apologize for the rudeness of one of his team members. He explained that they had already finished the conversation with the Empire Guild, but he wanted to apologize directly to the person involved in the incident. Jianho then stated that it was not necessary. The person involved was a very valuable asset to HMCS and was busy on a mission, escorting an awakened criminal to prison. Choi Sung-il lamented, saying that awakened prisons rarely requested HMCS's support, but Jianho explained that, although uncommon, it was not unprecedented. Large guilds occasionally made such requests, and in the future it could become more frequent. Choi Sung-il understood what he meant, and decided that instead of apologizing personally, he would give Ha-min himself the opportunity to apologize directly. Jianho agreed that it would be best for both parties to resolve it between themselves. With that, Choi Sung-il took his leave and left. Outside, Choi Sung-il reflected on how much Ha-min was hiding, but he also knew he could not give up on a talent like that. So he asked his secretary to contact him as soon as possible, since they needed to prepare for a trip. The secretary understood, asked whether she should reveal the location, and informed him that Ha-min was in Chan. The scene shifted once again, this time to a man who had filed a request with HMCS support. He questioned why they hadn't arrived yet. Another man replied that they had informed him they were on their way. A fat man then asked why they were making so much fuss over just a few months of prison. He remarked that it would be better if criminals got along with each other, especially with the audit season approaching. That same man picked up a paper indicating that the prisoner in question was Sherry Volk, and thought there wouldn't be a problem with him since he had been captured quietly. However, he didn't know exactly what had happened, because Sherry had suddenly started a rebellion out of nowhere. It was said that he had turned 5 people into pulp, even while under mana restriction. Another man commented that Sherry was quite well known in the underworld as a special criminal, and that the investigation agency had had a lot of trouble capturing him. In the end, the fat man decided that Sherry would be quickly transferred to Gangwon, and the scene ended with him shown in shackles. Someone approached Sherry Volk, saying they had a message for him. They informed him that there would be a meeting soon, that the organization had already moved some influence within, and that since he had a task to complete, he needed to get out of there. For that, a massive problem had to be caused inside that prison. Meanwhile, Siwoo was already standing in front of the prison gate. However, when Ha-min arrived at the scene, the prisoner had already left. He looked back and asked if the prisoner was on that bus, and the guard confirmed it seemed so, given the timing. Without hesitation, Ha-min got into the car and sped off, muttering that he deserved extra pay for this. Inside the bus, Volk tried to start a conversation with Siwoo, asking if he was the correctional officer responsible for the transfer. Siwoo simply replied that he was not. Volk then remarked that he didn't recognize his face from any major guild, and found it strange that someone would have so much confidence escorting him alone. Siwoo answered coldly, asking who the hell he thought he was. Volk began to laugh, saying it was madness to come there without knowing who he was, since any escort should at least know the prisoner they were transporting. Siwoo only stated that he was being transferred for talking too much, but Volk retorted, saying he had defeated 5 awakened criminals even while restrained by a heavy containment device. He asked if Siwoo could grasp the absurdity of it, a high-rank awakened criminal being transported in an ordinary vehicle accompanied only by an arrogant rookie. At that moment, he said Siwoo was completely screwed. That was when the bus exploded. Outside, an old man watched the scene beside a boy and asked if he had died. Emerging from the wreckage, Volk stared directly at the old man and asked if he was trying to kill him. The old man replied that, as a gray wolf, a beast like him wouldn't die from something like that. He mocked that, with that collar, he even looked like a celestial puppy. Volk threatened to rip out the old man's false teeth, but the man laughed, saying there was always someone who couldn't take a joke. Then he asked if Volk had gotten rid of the escort officer. Volk confirmed, saying the man was probably lying somewhere on the road, bleeding from his skull. Right after, the boy who accompanied them removed Volk's shackles. At that moment, Ha-min appeared, ordering the 3 of them not to move. He wondered why he always ended up on such gloomy highways. He said they had caused a serious incident, but seeing that Volk had been caught by people like them, he probably wasn't anything special. Ha-min remarked that Choi Sung-il wasn't interested in people of that level and demanded to know who they were and what organization they belonged to. He warned that if they didn't talk, they would be beaten up right there. The boy recognized Ha-min and said he had seen that face before. He was the high-rank hunter from the White Lion. He wondered how Ha-min had managed to track them. The old man then informed him that there were no other hunters nearby. He was alone. Volk smiled and said that was perfect, since he needed to warm up his body after being inactive for so long. Ha-min ordered everyone to shut up and repeated his question about who they were, but Volk replied that he didn't need to know, since he would be dead soon anyway. Then Volk activated his wolf bear transformation ability. Ha-min was surprised to see him perform a full metamorphosis, but decided that in the blink of an eye, he would force him back to human form. Activating his Asura ability, the two began an intense battle, fighting on equal terms. Even after delivering multiple strikes in succession, Ha-min realized that, despite landing every hit, Volk didn't seem to be taking any real damage. Volk mocked him, asking if he was just massaging his body. The old man commented that he didn't know how long it would take for reinforcements to arrive and that they couldn't waste time on that road. He then ordered the boy to finish it quickly. The boy activated his 10-headed serpent ability and launched it toward Ha-min, who managed to dodge at first. But soon after, he was grabbed by two of the snakes, and Volk took the chance to strike him with a brutal blow. Laughing, he said that the so-called fearsome white lion was nothing special. Even in that situation, Volk mocked Ha-min, saying that just being in a big guild didn't mean he was truly strong. He declared that he was nothing but useless trash. Ha-min, enraged, told him to shut up, accusing him of boasting while fighting cowardly in a 3-on-1 battle. Still, Volk kept kicking him on the ground, telling him to stay quiet. The old man then intervened, saying they had no time to waste and ordering Volk to finish it as quickly as possible. Volk, enjoying the situation, asked what Ha-min's last words would be. At that moment, an explosion erupted right in front of them. Through the smoke, Siwoo emerged, questioning if that was what Ha-min's master had taught him, to give up in front of an enemy. Ha-min was stunned to see him still alive. While adjusting the small camera strapped to his waist, Siwoo remarked that he had struggled quite a bit to figure out how it worked, since he didn't even know the difference between a live broadcast and an ordinary recording. Volk, in disbelief, said that made no sense because he was certain he had crushed his head. The old man added that the boy had died without even having the chance to react, and that he himself hadn't detected any mana flow, so it couldn't have been an ordinary ability. Ha-min warned that Siwoo was out of their reach and that they needed to wait for support. But Siwoo, ignoring the warning, asked how Volk dared interrupt his sacred coffee time. He then declared, with all the authority of an HMCS hunter, that the three individuals present were being considered criminals caught in the act, and that all of them would be executed on the spot by his hand. Min Siwoo observed Xiaolong's disciple and said that he should lie down and learn how it was really done, since the Asura skill wasn't that impressive anyway. However, Sherry Volk did not accept the provocation and charged at him, only to be struck by an extremely powerful punch. In that blow, Siwoo used the skill Asura, Black Armor, surprising everyone with his strength. Ha-min believed he was mastering the Sha technique, and Siwoo explained that, just like with raw meat, one had to drain the blood first to tenderize it. Meanwhile, the old man activated his skill called Thunderwall, but Siwoo dodged it with ease, leaving him stunned at his speed. Then Siwoo said that he had wasted years doing that, as if it were a useless path. At the side, Frey wondered if he could eat that skill, since he had never seen anything like it before. Siwoo, in turn, commented that it was far too expensive a skill, inaccessible to poor hunters. Curious and suspicious, Ha-min asked what Siwoo's true identity was and how he could use his master's skill. But before he could get an answer, the old man activated another ability and warned him not to act recklessly unless he wanted to die from his gravitational field. Siwoo, unfazed, only complained that his day was becoming more and more boring. He mentioned that, while his companion was being beaten, now came this old man with threats. The elder then proposed a truce so both sides could withdraw, ensuring everyone's safety. But Siwoo questioned the offer and said he had chosen that filthy mission of his own accord because he was searching for something. As for the man behind him, he stated he could resolve the issue with a single key explosion. The old man was confused, wondering if they weren't on the same side. Siwoo explained that they were professional hunters and assassins, probably from a powerful organization, since they had expensive equipment and anti-awakened skills. That alone was reason enough for them to end up dead in prison. The elder realized Siwoo had guessed almost everything, and was even more surprised that he had appeared there alone. He wanted to know who that boy was and what exactly he was searching for in that place. Siwoo, impatient, asked if the old man was going deaf with age, since he had just asked where he came from. The elder replied that if Siwoo approached, he would unleash his shockwave. Even so, Siwoo nullified the ability with ease, forcing him to retreat. He was shocked to realize that Siwoo had caused a mana overflow with a thunder-type skill, something that should have been impossible for an ordinary human. Siwoo noticed that he had already recovered about 40% of his power, and the high-quality warm-up seemed to be working. He then asked the elder not to waste time, since his life expectancy wasn't very long. The old man commented that, although he knew some things, he did not know everything. He explained that he was part of an organization and could not simply share information, since all members had signed an oath of silence. This oath was bound to the signer's mana, and anyone who revealed information would immediately be decreed a target. At that moment, the old man told Sherry Volk to get up, since she had been useless so far. Siwoo mocked the situation, asking if she was afraid of dying. He said that if that was the case, she didn't need to worry, because she would get used to dying after 3 or 4 times. The elder then ordered Sherry to do something. She once again rushed at Siwoo, saying that even if they died, she would split him in half. But suddenly, Ha-min landed a powerful punch on Sherry, interrupting her attack and asking where she thought she was going. With that, the battle numbers evened out. Seizing the moment, Siwoo activated his Blizzard skill, which quickly immobilized both opponents. He then grabbed the old man by the neck and said this was death. He wanted to know if, after experiencing it, the elder would answer his question. Even after coming back to life, the old man still refused to speak. So, as expected, one death wasn't enough. Siwoo broke his neck again. But before he died, he healed him instantly. Ha-min was baffled by that insane healing skill, unable to understand how it was possible. Siwoo repeated the process several times, always asking the same question: where did they come from? The old man, doubtful, began to recall. Upon observing Siwoo's skill, he finally recognized who he was. That boy was one of the 3 saints who had disappeared long ago, known as the infamous Mad Dog. His real name was Min Siwoo. Without further delay, he said he would now get straight to the point and demanded to know who that bastard was. It was then explained that there was an assassin organization called Bestia, a small elite group formed by killer hunters, centered around a single leader known as Crow. Within that world, Bestia wielded great influence, both in manpower and in skill. The old man revealed himself to be a first-generation hunter, someone who had worked in the shadows for many years and had no reason to refuse the offer of joining such a powerful organization. For an assassin belonging to a group like that, keeping silent about other members was considered the basic principle of life. By taking the oath of silence, each member's life and death were bound to the hands of the organization. The rule was clear: loyalty must last until the head is severed from the body. The elder thought it had already been 15 years since he had joined Bestia, and he believed he would never betray his group. He had always been willing to bite his own tongue and die, if necessary, to preserve the secret. However, after experiencing real death several times at the hands of Min Siwoo, his mouth eventually loosened. He revealed that one of the people Siwoo was asking about was part of Bestia, and that the man's code name was Black Mamba. Siwoo said he understood, but didn't stop there. He wanted to know if the 2 of them were involved in the assassination order against a hunter named Min Jun. Since they once again refused to answer, Siwoo made sure to intensify their pain, to the point that Sherry Volk felt as if the skin on her face was peeling off. Both wondered what kind of monster stood before them. The old man explained that, despite being called an organization, in practice they operated like independent cells, and it was very rare for them to collaborate with one another, as they didn't even know each other's identities or whereabouts. There was, however, a reason why he had sought that man in prison. Bestia held a summit every 2 years and 1 week, and the order he had received was to free the prisoner so he could participate in the meeting. The elder also said that if Siwoo wished, he could reveal the location and would do everything in his power to help him, asking in return that he accept the loyalty of him and Sherry. Ha-min did not like that one bit. He stated that Siwoo would never accept such a deal, but Siwoo himself retorted, asking since when the young man spoke for him. Nervous, Ha-min justified it by saying that since Siwoo had used the Asura, it was likely he had some connection with his master, perhaps even being his martial uncle or elder brother. He then begged to be accepted as a disciple, instead of seeing Siwoo ally himself with criminals. He admitted he had been rude at first, but promised that if he received an order, he would obey without hesitation. Siwoo, however, simply told him to shut his mouth. Deep down, all Siwoo wanted was information about Black Mamba. Still, he knew that if he let those 2 go free, the organization would hunt them down anyway. Things were becoming more complicated than he had expected. Even so, he made his decision. He would accept the 2 as his subordinates. Ha-min disagreed, but the old man swore he would serve him to the best of his ability without fail. Siwoo then imposed a condition. He said that even if they were forced to follow him, nothing guaranteed they wouldn't betray him again. For that reason, they would have to make a mana oath. Sherry Volk, terrified, asked if that wasn't the kind of contract that sealed the mana core if someone broke the promise, making it even worse than the oath of silence. The old man told him to shut up, as he didn't want to die dozens of times again. Siwoo ordered them to gather mana, declare their names, and bind themselves to the pact. Thus, the 2 of them ended up making the mana oath with him. Siwoo declared that the reward for loyalty would be the protection of their lives, as long as they remained tied by the contract. At that moment, Ha-min cried, asking what would become of him. He threatened that if he was not accepted as a disciple, he would report Siwoo to the association. The hunter only laughed and said he was joking with him. He then asked about the summit and confirmed if it would happen in a week. Ha-min replied yes. Upon hearing that, Siwoo said he would accept him as a disciple, which made the young man beam with joy. Siwoo reflected silently that 4 people were already enough to cause great turmoil, but to clean up the mess that was coming, he would need 1 more ally. Meanwhile, in another scene, men were discussing a prisoner who had escaped during transport. They remarked that the man was extremely dangerous and questioned why the officer in charge of the escort escort, had not shown his face, since all the responsibility would fall on HMCS. It was explained that, on average, 4 to 5 officers were assigned to transfer a prisoner, especially when the destination was a maximum security prison. In extreme cases, as many as 10 officers could be deployed. However, this time only 1 had been requested. According to the new escort officer, the prisoner had confessed that he had lobbied directly with a prison superior shortly before the escape. But the chief immediately contested that, stating that the body camera had been turned off, which made it obvious that the story was a lie. The conversation concluded with HMCS deciding that they could not take the prisoner's statement at face value. Since the matter had been raised, they would have to investigate. Thus, HMCS determined that an inquiry would be launched into the fugitive, demanding the cooperation of those involved. Shifting scenes, Byung-gu was indignantly arguing with Min Si-woo about the events. He reminded him that he had only instructed the team to finish the escort mission, and now he discovered that the assassin organization case was also under investigation. What shocked him most was that those very 3, Ha-min, the old man, and Sherry Volk, were now part of Si-woo's team. Even the fugitive prisoner, who should have been behind bars, was now walking at their side. Si-woo, however, told Byung-gu to shut up, saying there was a reason for all of this. He said he would explain the details of the operation and announced that the next day they would infiltrate the meeting of the Assassin Hunters organization. He explained that it was a major operation, with at least 8 high-ranking awakens specialized in killing hunters. The infiltration details would be explained by the renegades, and he ordered Byung-gu and Ha-min to pay close attention. Byung-gu, stunned, asked if it was true that they were really going to infiltrate an assassin organization unofficially and with such a small group. He also asked what the purpose of such a risky move could be. Si-woo replied that the purpose was obvious: the total annihilation of Bestia. Meanwhile, in another scene, the Bestia Council was gathered. A girl observed that Red Demon and Sherry Volk were absent, and that both had vanished. One of the men commented that the 2 could only be traitors, but another disagreed, saying they didn't seem to have the courage to defy the organization. Even so, their absence was surprising. Another member suggested it might be better to eliminate them right away. A strange girl remarked that Sherry was evil and that she would personally make sure to kill him. A man with a scar across his mouth interrupted, saying that was enough, and that the decision on the punishment of the absentees belonged only to the leader. A smiling person found it all amusing and pointed out that there were already 3 missing from the meeting, which was even stranger. He then asked if anyone else had anything to say, since soon they would have a death game to decide who would deal with the supposed traitors. One of the men, with serpent-like features, stated that the punishment of traitors should always be scheduled with a fixed date. What mattered was that everyone now knew the location and time of the meeting. A man with brown hair asked what they would do if they lost, since they could not simply invade the place without a plan. At that moment, the intruder alarm went off, detecting strange movements in entry routes A through C. The leader stood up and said his words had come true. Immediately, everyone else rose as well, commenting that there were 5 different entrances and that they needed to capture the invaders quickly. The leader said he would deal with the matter later. One person asked why Porcupine and Black Mamba would not help. Black Mamba replied coldly that he did not make a habit of dealing with trash, while the girl said she was too busy playing games. Meanwhile, Byung-gu was watching everything from above. He thought to himself that the leader had forgotten to say they needed to bring back the traitors' heads intact. The scene then shifted back to 30 minutes earlier. There, Byung-gu explained that this was Bestia's meeting point. The old man added that there were 5 different entrances, all equipped with intruder detection sensors. Since the internal structure of the place changed constantly, they didn't know where each entrance would lead, but they were sure that all paths eventually connected to the central conference hall. This meant that sooner or later, everyone would meet there. Si-woo concluded that the best strategy was to split the group. If they all entered through only one exit, the target could escape through the others. He determined that each of them should choose a different entrance. Then he asked if Byung-gu had brought the radio. The man replied yes, and Si-woo confirmed. Each of them would go through one of the 5 entrances. If anyone encountered Black Mamba, the order was to report immediately. With that, all members of the group entered the facility at the same time. As he walked through the corridors, Byung-gu noticed that the main passage was blocked. With no alternative, he slipped into a nearby ventilation duct, and thanks to that, was the first to reach the central conference hall. Observing the place, he was surprised to see that the detection sensors were off. Apparently, everyone there was a high-level hunter, but the security was much weaker than he had imagined. The conference hall was wide open and completely completely vulnerable. It looked like anyone who entered there would be instantly eliminated. From this, Byung-gu concluded that since 5 members of the group had been sent to investigate the intruders, serious battles would break out in different areas. Bringing everyone back together would be nearly impossible, but he believed he could at least thin out the number of enemies. Meanwhile, the girl known as Porcupine bent down to grab an orb. At that moment, an explosion went off. A grenade had been thrown at Black Mamba, who managed to defend himself in time. He admitted it had been a well-executed ambush, but complained that he didn't like playing hide-and-seek. Just then, Byung-gu revealed himself to face them. Black Mamba recognized him, saying he was Jung-gu, a hunter of the HMCS. Jung-gu believed only one of the enemies had died and even hurled a mana grenade to try to suppress the terrorists. However, they were still alive, especially the man sitting at the back, who seemed to be the leader. This man showed no obvious skill, yet didn't appear vulnerable either. Black Mamba remarked that such a person would never have come there alone, and suspected that traitors inside HMCS may have leaked classified information. When Jung-gu questioned whether that was really possible, Black Mamba replied that he would be surprised at the sheer uselessness of his former allies. With no more patience, Jung-gu charged at him. The leader observed his movements and admitted they weren't bad. Black Mamba commented that he had almost forgotten Jung-gu's skill, telekinesis. Jung-gu noticed that his enemy's skin was extremely resilient and his regeneration incredibly fast. Even without displaying any particular ability, he possessed extraordinary speed and durability. Black Mamba declared that this was already a good warm-up and struck a violent blow against Jung-gu, slamming him into the wall. He said he didn't want to leave behind evidence that connected the agency to the attack, but since the hunter was already bleeding, it couldn't be helped. He then asked the leader if he could kill the hunter. The leader replied he could do as he wished. However, before the finishing blow, Jung-gu managed to use the radio and reported that he was facing the target in the central conference hall and that there were 2 more enemies with him. Irritated, Black Mamba kicked the radio away and said it was already too late. He wondered who might show up next, perhaps the HMCS branch manager, the traitor known as the Red Demon, or even the young wolf pup. Jung-gu, bleeding, answered that maybe it would be all of them at once, and he was right. The 3 men appeared together, ready to strike Black Mamba. Yet he dodged all their attacks with agility and remarked that this was truly unexpected. He had not imagined they would bypass Bestia's assassins so easily. At that moment, Crow, who was also observing the situation, lamented trusting such useless people. Black Mamba found it strange as well. Analyzing the wounds on the others' bodies, it was clear there had been a serious fight. Still, he thought it unlikely that they had defeated Tiger or Grizzly so easily. When Ha-min attempted to strike him, Black Mamba grabbed his arm firmly, saying he was from the White Lion Guild and questioning why he was even there, since he wasn't part of HMCS. He then hurled Ha-min aside, noting that the others were already exhausted. To Black Mamba, none of this made any sense. How could people who had only met the day before be so organized and aligned in an operation? Who had gathered them? Then it was revealed that Siwoo had already defeated all opponents in his own area. Soon after, Jung-gu asked Ha-min how they had arrived so quickly. He explained that as soon as he heard the radio, he came directly, and Siwoo had ordered him to head for the center immediately. Most likely, the others had received similar instructions. Even so, they knew they had to keep fighting until their master arrived. Volk, however, admitted that capturing someone of A+ rank, especially someone so cunning, was impossible for them at that moment. After all, this man was none other than Black Mamba, and until then, he hadn't even revealed his true ability. On top of that, something about the conference hall felt strange. Jung-gu suspected that Black Mamba was an awakened shapeshifter. In terms of physical strength and leg speed, he was considered second in command of Bestia. However, it was unlikely that he possessed high-level magical skills such as tracking or detection. Perhaps he had set up some hidden device, or maybe Bestia's leader himself was watching the battle from afar. Not even Jung-gu knew Crow's true powers, which made him an unpredictable element. At that moment, the Red Demon volunteered to deal with the leader, asking the others to focus on capturing Black Mamba. Black Mamba, however, complained that no one was answering his question. The elder of the group activated his chain-binding skill and quickly shackled Crow. The leader protested, asking if he was really being forced to join this fight, but the old man simply told him to stay still. He said that, no matter how strong he was, he wouldn't easily escape a binding formation powered by a legendary artifact. Crow bound mocked them, saying that the old man's master must be incredible to have made him betray the organization so boldly. But then the woman known as Porcupine suddenly attacked the old man from behind. Jung-gu was stunned, for he was sure she had been dead. With the confusion, Black Mamba managed to break free from the chains and remarked that, despite appearances, they were all very busy, as they constantly needed to erase the organization's traces. For that reason, everyone there should die quickly. He then activated his draconic transformation ability. As Ha-min faced the enemy, he realized that Black Mamba's transformation was similar to Volk's, but the mana density was much greater. The very conference room itself felt strange, as if the floor was under their control. Ha-min declared that this time he would serve as bait to buy time until Siwoo arrived, since the others were struggling heavily in their battles. During the fight, Yoongu managed to stab Black Mamba's arm with a knife, but the attack had no effect. Confused, he began wondering if that too was a tribute magic. With a powerful roar, Black Mamba pushed everyone around away and suddenly appeared behind Yoongu, saying that hunters of justice usually make many mistakes. He stated that skill rankings, mana amounts, and numbers determined victory or defeat. He then locked Junggu in a chokehold and asked if he really believed there would be no traps in that place. Black Mamba revealed that the entire floor of the conference room was equipped with self-destruction, tracking, and reinforcement spells for emergencies. He explained that it was literally a snake pit, and once inside, no one would leave alive. He ordered Junggu to stop resisting, since it was useless. At that exact moment, however, he felt an extremely intense killing intent. Siwoo appeared behind him, grabbing him by the neck and saying he had finally found that damned snake, hinting that he had long awaited this moment. Without hesitation, Siwoo launched a direct attack against Porcupine. Crow, watching the scene, was shocked and commented that it seemed to be reverse engineering of all the magical formations available in that space. Frey then declared that all of this was possible because Siwoo was there. Crow admitted it was truly impressive, especially considering that facility was worth billions, and Siwoo had reduced everything to paper in an instant. Black Mamba admitted he was surprised by Siwoo's entrance, but now understood his ability and realized Siwoo was the one who had gathered that whole group. He then concluded that the real culprit behind everything happening was Siwoo himself. Siwoo, however, said that the true culprit was Black Mamba. Crow, still chained, remarked that it seemed Siwoo's main target really was Black Mamba and wondered what problem that man had caused him. Black Mamba, confused, said he didn't know him and that it could only be revenge. Still, he acknowledged that Siwoo was an impressive man. Siwoo replied that it wasn't just revenge. There was something he needed to find out. Crow ended up being restrained, but remained curious, wanting to understand what had made those people so loyal and who Siwoo truly was. Meanwhile, Siwoo kept attacking Black Mamba, who couldn't comprehend how he had so easily disabled all the traps and even exposed his identity with tracking techniques. His attack speed was unmatched by any close combat hunter he had ever faced. After receiving a devastating blow, Black Mamba returned to his original form, astonished. He admitted he had never seen anyone like Siwoo and said he had detailed information on the highest-ranking hunters. Then he asked who, after all, Siwoo was and what he was seeking. Calmly, Siwoo replied that Black Mamba was mistaken about one thing. The one asking questions here was him. He asked if the enemy hadn't realized he had been holding back during the fight. He stated that, if he wasn't careful, Black Mamba could die, so it was better to stay quiet and take the beating in silence. While stepping on Black Mamba's head, the latter begged him to stop. Siwoo lifted him by the face and said there was a place even higher than the VIP sectors. Then, staring at the enemy, he asked who had ordered Minjin's assassination. Black Mamba asked what the connection between them was, but Siwoo said that if he wanted to stay alive, he had better answer. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Black Mamba said that maybe he should talk. However, when he opened his mouth, he revealed a symbol engraved on his tongue. He explained that even if he told something, he couldn't prevent the listener's ear from melting. He then spat black liquid in Siwoo's face, declaring that the basic principle of an assassin was never to reveal the client's name. Furious at being hit, Siwoo said that if Black Mamba didn't want to talk, then he would force it out of him. At that moment, the enemy was shocked to see Siwoo using a healing ability, something uncommon for a fighter. Desperate, Black Mamba called out for help from the leader, but Crow replied that he was completely surrounded. Terrified, Black Mamba said he would tell everything. The instant he began to speak, revealing that his contractor was Pandemonium, Siwoo had already delivered a fatal strike. Observing the scene, Crow commented that he finally understood who Siwoo was. He was the legendary first-generation hunter known as Mad Dog, the crazy dog who had disappeared 10 years earlier. Siwoo then asked if Crow was also part of Pandemonium, but he denied it. He explained that their organization was essentially an assassin guild, and thus they didn't accept personal requests. Assassins to them were merely tools. He said he had only deduced everything based on the information he possessed and Siwoo's overwhelming strength. Furthermore, he said that he had heard from his own sister stories about a first-generation hunter who used a very peculiar healing ability. Siwoo asked if she really didn't know anything, and she replied that in any case, he had already discovered everything. That would be her final answer. Even so, Siwoo found it strange that she she had completely forgotten about his existence. But in the end, that no longer mattered. He simply called Porcupine back. Soon after, an explosion occurred, and the woman was thrown away together with Porcupine, asking if the mad dog would chase them. Siwoo answered that it wasn't necessary, since he already had a lead. She said fine, but that they would soon meet again. The two disappeared right after. Hamin questioned if Siwoo would really let those people escape. He replied that if they chased after them, it would trigger the self-destruction trap installed on the floor of the room. In their current state, none of them would escape in time. For now, the most important thing was to start cleaning up the place, which left everyone frustrated by the overwhelming mess. Even after all of that, Siwoo kept wondering what the connection between pandemonium and everything was, and what exactly Minjun had discovered. In another scene, Siwoo was still reflecting on pandemonium. He recalled that 20 years ago, the first gate had opened on Earth. From that moment on, all sorts of things began to cross over. Mana, the source of all power, monsters, magic stones, and various rare resources. However, the most important among them were the demons. These demons belonged to a race from another dimension, where all creatures were naturally adapted to the manipulation of mana. They were awakened beings specialized in abilities. As soon as they crossed the gate, they took advantage of the global chaos to invade Earth, claiming to be the administrators of a new, superior dimension. They quickly seized control of the gates and began treating humans as an inferior species, since humanity's civilization had been disrupted by monster attacks and mana strikes. They established their base, known as the Demonic Castle, on the continent and monopolized all gates that appeared, acting as though they were the rightful rulers of the world. In response to this situation, a group of cowardly humans began to follow the Demon King, leader of the demons. This group became known as Pandemonium. Fortunately, demon tyranny was halted by the first-generation hunters, who had mastered mana manipulation. The war between humans and demons, waged to protect Earth, ended in humanity's victory. 10 years had already passed since Siwoo had defeated the fourth-ranked Demon King, casting him into a dimensional rift. Even so, he now wondered, why was the name Pandemonium resurfacing again? The doubt lingered, and so he called for Frey. He told him that demons also existed in the other world they had been in, even if their appearances were a little different. Frey confirmed that Siwoo was right. He said demons were indeed one of the most influential races among the many dimensions he had visited. Siwoo mentioned that, in that other world, demons used dragons as familiars, subjugating and exploiting their subspecies. He questioned whether they acted like bandits in every dimension. Frey, however, admitted he wasn't sure, as he had lost all memories from before meeting Siwoo in that world. Still, he felt he had lost something important to the demons. From what they had seen of demons along the way, Frey believed they were more than capable of such things. Siwoo then lamented that they didn't have enough information. He had thought those bastards were already dead and hadn't had time to investigate their identities. In that other world, he had only encountered familiars and spent most of his time fighting to survive. The only thing he knew for certain was that their mana patterns were different from humans, and that demons had become more skilled at disguising themselves among them, especially compared to 10 years ago. Frey suggested casually that Siwoo should just beat everyone up. Siwoo, however, replied that it wasn't that simple. At that moment, Sejun entered the room. Siwoo was surprised by his early arrival and asked the reason. Sejun replied that he wanted to understand why his brother had requested his office so suddenly, and what kind of mess he was involved in this time. Siwoo explained that he was only investigating Minjun's whereabouts, but Sejun insisted there was more to it. He mentioned that the team leader had reported that Siwoo annihilated a group of assassin hunters, and had even used the office to gather people connected to the case, who were asking to keep everything secret from the other guilds. Irritated, Sejun demanded that he stop drawing attention, as that bastard Choi Dae-soo could find out everything. Siwoo acknowledged that Byung-gu did indeed have a big mouth, but asked his brother not to worry. He said that Jung-gu had promised to conceal his involvement in the entire operation, and that, in any case, he was planning to meet Sho personally soon, since there were many things that bothered him. He stated that if he went personally, Sho would have no way to react. Sejun, realizing he couldn't stop his brother, only asked him not to go overboard. He reminded him that 10 years had passed, and even though Siwoo had changed a lot, he could still be in danger. Siwoo told him not to worry so much. Sejun then said fine, but asked only that he keep his promise. As part of the deal for borrowing the office, Siwoo had promised to train the guild's new recruit. Sejun asked if he remembered the hunter Jisoo, commenting that her awakened ability was more unique and complicated than expected. It would be great if Siwoo could take a look at her. But Siwoo, hungry, told his brother to stop talking and go eat something. Sejun joked that his brother seemed to have a black hole in his stomach. Frey agreed, saying he was also hungry and that the mana was pathetic. He asked for fried chicken. After that, Siwoo called Jung-gu, who answered by asking if he really wanted his name removed from that case. Siwoo bluntly said he had heard Jung-gu told everything to his brother and asked if he had a death wish. Jung-gu retorted that this wasn't the main issue and asked if Siwoo had any idea how big the case was. It was the first time a group of professional assassin hunters had emerged, and HMCS had eliminated them all by itself. Because of that, they were receiving interview and cooperation requests from various institutions. The entire agency was in chaos. Jung-gu said the branch manager was closely watching that team, and since Siwoo's name had been omitted from the reports, all the responsibility had fallen on him. Siwoo, indifferent, replied that it was good for him to have some achievements from time to time and asked what the problem was with that. Jung-gu, irritated, said it wasn't just about achievements. He wondered how he was supposed to explain that he had dealt with all those assassins alone. Siwoo suggested he say that White Lion Hamin had helped him. Jung-gu said he had already tried that, but the White Lion Guild leader was too rude and uncooperative. Because of the previous prison escape incident, it would be better if Siwoo handled it personally. But Siwoo, lazy, said he was busy eating and wished him good luck, ending the call. Sejun, who overheard the end of the conversation, asked if it was with Jung-gu, and Siwoo confirmed, saying he was glad to work with him. Soon after, he asked his brother how demons were doing nowadays and whether they still looked the same as 10 years ago. Sejun explained that after the disappearance of the 4th-ranked demon king, the demons had proposed a peace treaty with humans. Since then, they had settled on the polar continent and created an organization dedicated to researching Earth's mana. At the moment, they weren't a major problem. In fact, they even cooperated with some countries on investigations. It was rare for a demon to leave its territory, and it had been a long time since one had appeared on the front lines. Nowadays, many children thought demons were just urban legends, which said a lot about how much things had changed. Frey, however, thought it was all nonsense. To him, demons would never do something like that. Siwoo reflected that he also felt suspicious, but admitted that just as there was plenty of trash among humans, there must also be among demons. He concluded that not all races were the same. Even so, something bothered him. The person he had fought with used mana that was very similar to that of demons, yet there was something different about it. He wondered if it could be some kind of mixture between human and demon. Since demons had appeared on Earth 20 years ago, Siwoo knew that the possibility of a connection wasn't impossible. In fact, he felt that Minjun's vengeance was only just beginning. As he followed the footprints he had left behind, he realized that this battle might be much longer than he had imagined. In another scene, Siwoo was teaching his subordinates how to circulate mana inside their bodies. Hamin complained that no matter how closely he followed the instructions, he still couldn't feel the mana resonating. He questioned whether the awakening of abilities didn't happen when adrenaline was at its peak, and said that just sitting still meditating didn't seem to help at all. He preferred moving his body and warming up. Meanwhile, Siwoo scolded the others for making too much noise during meditation. Frey remarked that nowadays, there were many hunters who simply released mana without much thought. Folk added that if the attack was strong enough, there was no need to worry so much about technique. Siwoo then began explaining the so-called tutorial tower. He said that many were misled into thinking they had awakened abilities in artificial gates. He explained that the difference in power depended on how much one was able to burn their fuel, in this case, mana. Without mastering the basics of circulation, many had only triggered their abilities by accident. That was why they couldn't even feel or fully understand what they were doing. Frey decided to clarify further, saying he would only repeat it once. When a human resonates with mana for the first time, a storage space opens inside the body, called the John. The ability manifests from the mana that circulates within that point, depending on each person's individual traits. The density and strength of the ability depend on how well the person can control the mana inside the John. With training, this space expands, allowing more mana to be stored, and if someone reached an even higher level, they could even awaken multiple Johns within their body. That was why understanding this essence was fundamental. Meditating and training mana circulation was the safest path, and he told them to dedicate themselves without complaining. Frey, however, teased him, saying Siwoo spoke as if he knew everything just because he had worked for 100 years. Siwoo ignored him and warned that the next day's training would be so intense that their bodies would be pushed to their limits. At that moment, Jung-gu appeared, asking why Siwoo wasn't answering the phone. Siwoo teased him, asking if he was some kind of stalker. Jung-gu, serious, said it was urgent. The branch manager had summoned him and he needed to go with him immediately. In the next scene, as they made their way to the location, Siwoo asked why the branch manager wanted to see him and if Jung-gu had mentioned his name. He denied it, explaining that it was probably because of the prison transfer incident. Then, some men approached, wondering if that wasn't the famous team leader Huang, who had done something remarkable recently. Among them were Juntae Ha, a a member of the gangs, and Changwon, leader of the gangbook team. Junggu asked if Changwon had returned from his trip and remarked that he should have quietly gone back to work instead of stirring up trouble. Changwon replied that he was only giving a friendly greeting and asked if this was the rookie everyone had been talking about, the kid who caused the incident at Incheon prison. He said his eyes were excellent for spotting talent. Junggu cut him off, saying that was enough, and added that he must be spouting nonsense because of jet lag. Juntae-ha retorted that since they had come from Japan, jet lag wasn't an excuse. Changwon, on the other hand, implied that they were frustrated because Gangbook kept getting invited to international missions, while the others remained overworked, slaving day and night and still letting criminals escape. At that moment, Juntae-ha turned directly to Siwoo, saying that as veterans, they at least deserved a greeting. Siwoo responded bluntly, saying greeting is crap, and told him to move aside since his fat and fake muscles were completely blocking the way. He asked if the glasses he was wearing were just for decoration, since he clearly couldn't see how much he was getting in the way. Irritated, Juntae-ha told Chungwon that he would teach the rookie a lesson, but Junggu scolded them, reminding them they were at the main office. Changwon, unfazed, asked who Junggu thought he was to lecture his subordinate, and whether he hadn't heard the absurd things the rookie had just said. Juntae said he hadn't heard anything, and asked Siwoo what he had said. Siwoo replied that it seemed like Juntae's ears were clogged. That angered Changwon, who began to lose patience. Furious, he said that everyone there was crazy, and since they were all gathered, they might as well drill holes into each other's skulls. At that moment, the branch manager suddenly appeared. His presence intimidated the men, especially when he stated that he was there because of true power. His name was Baek Gun-ho. He said he had been wondering where Siwoo had been all this time, and added that Junggu should have resolved that matter more quickly. He then invited the two of them to accompany him to his office, saying he had prepared some special things, since there was an important guest that day. When Changwon tried to complain to the manager, he was cut off by an embarrassing comment. The manager said he had heard rumors that Changwon had asked for a very peculiar type of entertainment while in Japan. According to him, if Changwon really wanted to become true power, he needed to work hard, but not in the way he had been doing there. That comment left Changwon and his companions visibly humiliated. They couldn't understand why the manager seemed to like the rookie Siwoo so much. In a new scene, manager Gun-ho remarked that it was the first time he was meeting Siwoo personally. He acknowledged that he must have been very busy since joining the company, especially with such absurd talent. Siwoo agreed, but asked why exactly he had been called there. Gun-ho laughed at the young man's bluntness and explained that the reason for the meeting was to ask a few questions about the prisoner transport mission involving Jin Chan. He explained that because of the incident with the beastly creature, investigative authority had been transferred to the branch office. In addition, the corruption case involving Inchan's imprisonment had also progressed. This meant it was no longer possible to ignore the investigation into the fugitive prisoner. A hunter powerful enough to defeat Garcia had let that criminal escape, and that demanded answers. Gun-ho directly asked whether Siwoo truly knew nothing about the fugitive's whereabouts. He then asked Junggu to leave the room, as he wanted to speak with Siwoo alone. Once they were alone, Gun-ho explained that he was not an inflexible person. He said he had known Junggu for a long time and considered him an extremely competent man. However, it was hard to believe he had investigated and destroyed an assassin organization by himself. To him, the annihilation of the beastly creature's group and the fugitive's case were directly linked to Siwoo. It was evident the boy had discovered some crucial clue during the escort mission. That represented a huge achievement, practically a confession of involvement. Gun-ho said that if the fugitive provided information about the organization he belonged to, there might be a chance for a significant reduction in his sentence. However, no matter what happened, they could not simply ignore the existence of an awakened criminal, especially given the involvement of the mysterious newcomer Siwoo. That was when the manager mentioned he had sought advice from an elder brother, someone who knew Siwoo very well. He said he had brought this person because she had greatly wanted to meet him again. Siwoo was confused, trying to imagine who it could be. Then Gun-ho revealed the identity. It was Kyung-hoo, a true legend among the first-generation hunters and leader of the Sol Abi Guild. He was known as one of the three great lords of South Korea. In another scene change, Kyung-hoo remarked that many years had passed since the last time he had heard Siwoo's name. He admitted that for a long time, he believed he was dead. Yet here he was, alive, and clearly older, despite looking exactly the same as before. Frey, who was present, asked who that older man was. Siwoo realized he was one of the legendary first-generation hunters, the famous sword demon, Kunhu, known as a master of weapons. Kunhu jokingly remarked that it was not he who had aged, but rather Siwoo, who seemed to have stopped in time. 10 years had passed since Siwoo's disappearance, and now he was back with his face intact, not a wrinkle on him. He asked where he had been hiding all this time, since even his disciples had searched desperately for him. Siwoo suggested they order another bottle, since they had a lot to talk about. After telling the whole story, Kunhu said he was no longer even surprised by such revelations. Siwoo explained that everything began when a dimensional magic was activated at the moment he defeated a 4th-level demon king. He still did not know whether it was a final skill or the effect of some mysterious artifact. But, to his surprise, Kunhu revealed that the demon king was still alive, which shook Siwoo deeply. Confused, Siwoo asked how that was possible. After all, humans and demons had signed a peace treaty, and to him, that world was already completely insane. Kunhu explained that the demon king was alive, but now just a shadow of his former self, practically a walking corpse. According to him, the conflict between humans and demons, which had dragged on for years while Siwoo was trapped on Earth, was much more complex than it seemed. After the 4th-level demon king was defeated and Siwoo disappeared, the demons immediately proposed a peace treaty. That war, in truth, had been a personal initiative of the demon king, and with his fall, there was no reason to continue. Siwoo remarked that it was obvious the demons felt threatened after the defeat of their own leader. But Kunhu added that, even on the human side, the situation was critical. Since the appearance of the first gates, monster attacks had become constant, plunging the world into chaos. Survival was difficult, communication had broken down, and security was practically non-existent. The gates barely closed, and the awakened, inexperienced, and out of control, made everything even more unstable. The war between humans and demons had left the world exhausted. It was in this context that the demons themselves decided to propose a peace treaty. To everyone's surprise, they offered a condition considered groundbreaking. They would help repair the damage caused in each country, and also teach how to close mana gates. In return, they asked for the remains of the demon king, who had already completely drained his power. After that, they would withdraw to the polar region, where they would wait for the opening of the portal back to their dimension. At that time, mana gates were still a novelty, and most people believed that the sooner the demons left, the sooner peace would return. For that reason, many saw the proposal as positive for humanity. Eventually, the treaty was accepted. High-ranking hunters from various nations gathered to represent their countries and approve the agreement. South Korea's representative was Choi Dae-soo, who agreed to the terms. Since then, the demons had remained in their designated territory and, except for support participation, had never again caused problems. Even so, some first-generation hunters still had doubts about the demon's intentions. But with Siwoo's disappearance, those doubts began to fade, and the suspicious ones dispersed. With the restoration of global communication, the situation stabilized, and public interest in the demons gradually disappeared. Kyung-hoo himself admitted that, since then, he had never again had reason to distrust the demons. However, Siwoo's sudden return made him begin to rethink everything. Siwoo asked what was strange about it, and Kyung-hoo replied that it was Siwoo's very existence. Over the past 10 years, his name had completely vanished from all records. Rumors suggested that Choi Dae-soo himself was involved. He had erased everything so efficiently that, to the new generations, Siwoo had become a complete stranger. Even those who had fought alongside him could no longer clearly remember his face. To Kyung-hoo, that was extremely suspicious. They had fought countless battles together, and forgetting someone like that in so little time made no sense. Siwoo questioned what kind of additional deal Choi Dae-soo could have made with the demons. Kyung-hoo replied that, at that time, or even now, he would have been capable of doing anything to defeat them. Frey, listening to everything, said that it was typical of those damn demons. Siwoo then began to wonder if Choi Dae-soo had conspired with the demons solely to erase his existence from that world. But even so, he couldn't understand the reason. Holding a grudge because he had defeated the Demon King didn't seem like enough of a motive. What would the demons gain from it? Kyung-hoo reaffirmed that, as he had already said, the demons had shown no hostile movements since then. On the contrary, they were helping humans adapt to mana, which made it difficult to find any fault in their actions at present. Siwoo, however, remarked that if the demons hadn't thought of themselves as the owners of the world, the war wouldn't have happened in the first place. Kyung-hoo agreed and said that perhaps Siwoo's former disciples, who had fought alongside him back then, might know more about the situation. He asked if he wanted to see them again, but Siwoo replied that they were all scattered and that it wouldn't be easy to find them. Even so, Kyung-hoo told him that Kang Yo-hwa was in South Korea. 10 years ago, she had only been a novice, but now she was an S-rank hunter and leader of a guild called Changhwa. He remembered that she always followed Siwoo everywhere. No one would have imagined that later she would end up following Choi Dae-soo. 10 years was enough time to change everything, even mountains and rivers. It was then, without warning, that Siwoo commented that the drink tasted bland. Kyung-hoo laughed and asked if his palate was that of a child, since that was a very expensive liquor. After that, Kyung-hoo suggested that they should also call Si-jun, so they could all catch up after so long. Siwoo commented that he would go crazy if he found out the two of them knew each other, since back then he was just a child. But now, he had already grown up quite a bit. While all this was happening, someone was taking a picture of the three of them. Shortly afterward, this man called a guild leader, reporting that he had sent an image of the person who had met with Siwoo. According to him, they had been together since the beginning of the HMCS headquarters. The guild leader replied that he had done a good job, and asked him to return immediately. That person was was none other than Kang Yohua herself. Upon seeing the photo, she was shocked. She asked herself if it was really Siwoo and thought that, as she had suspected, he was still alive. She remembered the premonition she had felt because of the recent strange movements of the Empire Guild and the commotion at the tutorial tower. Even so, she couldn't believe he had truly returned. Faced with that confirmation, Kang Yohua collapsed to the ground and began crying intensely, remembering her master. She complained that Sejun had given her no information since she had joined Choi Dae-soo's side. She knew she had made the right choice by continuing to follow Kyung-hoo, even when everyone said he would never return. She had never given up on Siwoo until the very end, but even after searching the entire world, she had found absolutely nothing about him. Suddenly, Siwoo appeared in Korea with the same youthful face as always. Even while emotional, she stood up, wiping her tears. She knew it wasn't the time to cry. She needed to find him as quickly as possible. However, at that very moment, Choi Dae-soo appeared behind her and asked where she was rushing off to. Shaking nervously, Yohua tried to disguise it, saying it was nothing. But Dae-soo replied that it had been a long time since he had seen that expression on her face. She had always been cold, even when her mother had died. So, if she was reacting that way, it was because someone truly important had returned, and he knew who it was. The infamous mad dog called Siwoo. Dae-soo's words left her even more frightened. He questioned whether that was why she was running like a little dog who had just found its owner, calling her naive and foolish. Even though she had abandoned the family lineage, he would not easily let go of the only niece he had, the only daughter of his sister. Yohua firmly replied that he was misunderstanding everything. She said that from the very beginning, she only wanted to find her master, but Dae-soo revealed that he had always known that. He knew she would approach him, suspecting he had been involved in Siwoo's disappearance. He also knew she would pretend to follow his orders, while secretly investigating his secrets. Even so, he had accepted her. The reason was simple. She had become a capable and extremely useful hunter. In today's world, every hunter was considered a precious asset. It would have been a waste not to make use of someone so valuable, especially one of his own blood. But Yohua called him ridiculous. She said that he had abandoned her at the hardest moment of her life, and that she had never considered him family. The only reason she was there was because of her master. In response, Dae-soo reminded her that even without knowing she was the daughter of a cruel criminal, he had accepted her. He asked her not to be naive. Siwoo was ruthless with criminals, and if he were to discover her past, what kind of reaction would he have? Even if she pretended to be someone else, her roots would never change. The scene then shifted to Jisoo, who had gone to meet Siwoo. She had heard that the new training master would be him. When she arrived, she asked if the people with him would also be participating in the training. One curious detail was that Volk was dressed in a teddy bear costume so that no one would discover his identity. Siwoo confirmed that everyone there was his student and therefore she could consider them training partners. Jisoo politely introduced herself, saying she was from the Empire Guild. One of the boys beside her introduced himself as Kim Byung-guk, also from the Empire Guild. The old man with them was surprised to find a hunter of that age with such a powerful aura. Smiling, he introduced himself, saying he was happy to meet them. He thought she was a smart young woman and would learn quickly. Siwoo, however, made sure to clarify that although they called it training, for him it was community service. He warned that if anyone tried anything funny, they could very well die right there. Volk confirmed, saying he was under a mana oath and that his own head was at risk. Siwoo then brought everyone back to focus, ordering them to stop slacking off because they were about to enter. And so the Empire Guild group passed through the F5 gate of the estate. Jisoo commented that she was very nervous. Due to the nature of her ability, that was the first gate she had entered since the tutorial tower. Siwoo tried to calm her down, explaining that gates were basically connections to other dimensions. They were simply doors. But Kim Byung-guk asked if there had ever been cases where people disappeared during an invasion. According to him, when the gate closed, there were the so-called swallowed by the gate incidents. Siwoo countered, saying that wasn't exactly what happened, since the gate merely shut. The old man in turn agreed with him and explained that nowadays, humans practically held the keys to those gates. The fact that guilds owned gates made this very clear. What once had been disasters had now turned into great business opportunities. Mana stones, monster cores, and even corpses. Everything had become a new type of resource. And naturally, everything turned into money. After that, they crossed the portal and arrived in a new place. Jisoo began to feel nauseous and asked if that could be a kind of gate sickness. Kim Byung-guk remarked that, unlike the tower, there weren't monsters right at the entrance. Siwoo watched everyone and wondered if kids of this generation were all like that. He thought to himself what the Hunter Academy was even teaching them. Volk commented that Siwoo wouldn't understand, since he was from the first generation. Starting from Generation 1.5, gate invasions had become commonplace, and nowadays, it had turned into a job with a set curriculum. When a hunter cleared the tutorial tower, they received a classification, and guilds assessed their value based on that result. As for real combat, most hunters only learned after joining a guild. Siwoo, however, stated that this F-rank gate didn't offer real combat. The monsters here would be wiped out with just a single wave of attack. So, he asked the rookies to show their skills first. Kim Byung-guk thought he was being obedient only because it was an order from the guild leader, but he wondered who that man even was to bring strangers into training. He found it absurd to be tied to someone who couldn't even properly manifest his own ability. When Jisoo tried to summon her ability, she was thrown back and failed completely. However, Siwoo threw a whip toward her. When she asked what it was for, he explained that it was a spellcasting focus, and the more complex the pattern, the more efficient it became. Knowing the unique nature of her mana, he asked her to try again, this time using the whip as a focus. Determined, Jisoo said she would try once more, but at that moment, a horde of goblins appeared in front of them. Siwoo thought it was good for training, and said it was the students who should handle it, since the training was for them, not the instructor. As soon as she manifested her ability, the old man commented that it was a tracking type ability, rated at best as B+. Frey observed that the boy's style seemed flashy, full of showy effects, but with no real substance. The old man agreed and warned that if he kept using his abilities so recklessly, his mana would quickly run out. Kim Byung-guk thought goblins were relatively easy monsters to capture, but making a rookie face an entire horde was absurd. He asked Jisoo if she was almost done, and she replied that yes, she was almost there. However, at that moment, he collapsed to the ground, his mana completely drained. It was then that Jisoo managed to activate her tamer ability. For 10 minutes, she could control a monster. She ordered one of the goblins to retreat and felt immensely happy for finally succeeding in using her ability. Volk was impressed to realize that she used a taming ability, knowing that kind of power was extremely rare. The old man agreed. Even with the help of the whip, the classification of the ability itself seemed very high, and he was eager to see how that girl would develop. Frey, on the other hand, commented that he was finally seeing something worthwhile. In his case, something he wanted to devour. Siwoo, however, asked her directly, what did she plan to do controlling only one goblin? This threw Jisoo into despair. She began begging the boy to wake up, completely lost, not knowing what to do. Later, Jisoo, all bruised, thanked him for the training. She said that thanks to it, she had finally been able to better understand her ability. Volk commented that her face looked pale and asked if she could make it back home. But Siwoo said he didn't care about that, and if she didn't care either, then she should ask Sejun to find her another mentor. Jisoo then spoke sincerely. She explained that she had thought becoming a hunter meant being someone special, that it was enough just to awaken an ability. The higher the rank, the more special and valuable she would be. But now she understood that an ability was only a tool. What really mattered was how she used it, and that was why she wanted to learn to adapt to her own mana. Siwoo commented that, at the very least, she had learned something, and that she should keep working hard. He also said that if she wanted help, she should ask someone else because he was already on his way out. But at that moment, he realized there were more people around. Red Demon asked if they were from other guilds, and Siwoo said he had heard rumors they were negotiating with the Za Guild. The conversation involved gates, discovered simultaneously in the desert region, and the groups that had been sent there were already arriving. Some people told Siwoo that, according to the reports, that gate was very different from the usual. When the hunters from the Empire Guild discovered it, the first bodies had already been found inside. But unlike typical monster attacks, the scene was intact. The corpses showed no external injuries, only their internal organs had been corrupted. Siwoo remarked that it was truly strange. The only plausible explanation was that something had been placed inside the bodies. At that moment, he spoke firmly, saying that they had finally reunited. He said that his master had returned, and she hadn't even greeted him. He added that he would like to talk to her if she had the time. But Siwoo answered coldly, saying he was sorry, because there was something more important to do at that moment. Frey didn't miss the chance to mock him, saying he had been rejected at the speed of light, and asking if he needed comfort. Red Demon also joked, saying the woman had been rude, and asking if she was one of Siwoo's former disciples. Siwoo acknowledged that it was exactly that, but he found it strange to see Yohua crying. Soon after, she was shown sitting, quietly shedding tears. Siwoo approached, curious, and wondered why she was crying again. He remarked that he and Sejun were practically the same age, yet she was always deeply hurt whenever she failed in training. He also found it odd that she always hid away to cry alone. In response, Yohua slapped his hand away, annoyed. She asked if Sejun, being the master's younger brother, had received better treatment, while she was just a nobody to them. She admitted she was grateful for having been taken in when she was on the verge of starving, but said she would rather he not meddle in matters that didn't concern him. She acknowledged that she knew how strong and persistent Siwoo was. was, but made it clear he wasn't truly her brother. Siwoo, however, pulled her hair firmly and replied that he was the one who decided that. He believed that, since being born in that world was already so difficult, he at least had the right to choose his own family. He declared that he considered Yeohwa his younger sister, and said that if she treated him as an older brother, maybe that would ease what she was feeling. Embarrassed, Yeohwa denied it. She said she didn't need that. Then Siwoo warned her that the next day's training would be even more hellish and asked if she was ready to cry twice as much. But she replied that training was already hellish every day. Looking back, Yeohwa thought she had said that out of embarrassment, but deep down, she was being sincere. She didn't want to be just the master's little sister or just a disciple. She wanted to be strong enough to fight by his side at the same level as a true companion who could help him in his mission to save the world. During this process, she ended up developing feelings she shouldn't have. She felt guilty for she was merely the daughter of a terrible criminal. Even though she had been abandoned and raised with stolen money, she believed she shouldn't harbor feelings for someone like Siwoo. Yet, she thought Choi Dae-soo was right when he said her master shouldn't get involved with someone like her. But despite all that, Yeohwa couldn't just stand still. Since her master had given her a new chance at life, she was determined to fight until the very end. Taken by this decision, she went to Sejun's room. He remarked that the meeting time was still far away and asked why she was there. She answered that she needed to talk about something important. At that moment, the scene shifted. Now, Yeohwa explained that it wasn't a matter of trust or distrust. Since the first appearance of the gates, the lords had resisted the demons. Back when bandits were corrupted by an unknown power, many of her friends had fought with everything they had for life and for humanity's dignity. Even so, if it was necessary to make an inevitable pact with demons to rebuild civilization, perhaps that was a positive step for national recovery. But Dae-soo interrupted her, asking her to get straight to the point. He wanted to know if Yeohwa had met Siwoo and if he considered him suspicious. He commented that the 10 years that had passed seemed to have tamed that mad dog, who now just wagged his tail while assessing the situation. He said that, in a way, he himself wasn't much different. Everyone seemed to have the wrong idea about him, but all he wanted was humanity's well-being. However, for him, 3 lords were already too many. He began to smile and declared that he wanted to become the supreme king. Ever since humans received this absurd power called mana, he wanted to know how far it could go. His greatest goal was to achieve supreme power. For that, any pact made with demons was just a means to reach that moment. He explained that to accelerate national recovery and benefit the citizens, all leaders, without exception, had joined forces with the demons. No matter their hidden motivations, the truth was that humanity had risen again and had become a more advanced civilization than before. And all of this in only 10 years. He said that Kyung-hoo at that time had probably thought negotiating was the best choice, and asked if he was now ready to take responsibility for that. Kyung-hoo then asked if Dae-soo had made some kind of deal involving Siwoo, and if he was connected to his disappearance and the erasure of his records. But Dae-soo laughed, saying that was absurd. He claimed he had nothing to hide, and if Siwoo really had returned, then he could now crush him without fear. He also said he was willing to have a conversation with the two of them. It was then that Siwoo appeared. He said it was the perfect moment, because he had some questions to ask Dae-soo directly. As he approached, he remarked that it had been a long time since their last encounter. Siwoo observed the absurdly high place where Dae-soo lived and wondered why anyone would choose to live like that. But before anyone else could approach, he went straight to the point. He bluntly asked if Dae-soo had conspired with Pandemonium to send him to another realm. Dae-soo replied that Siwoo's entrance had been impressive, but he found the question boring. Siwoo then warned him that if he didn't want to see the entire building destroyed, he had better answer. Avoiding the subject, Dae-soo commented that something about Siwoo irritated him. Even after 10 years, he didn't have a single wrinkle on his face. He still seemed dissatisfied with the trip he had taken, to the point of having broken his window upon arrival. Angry, Siwoo hurled an object right past Dae-soo's face and threatened him seriously. He said that if Dae-soo didn't answer, he would tear him to pieces and scatter the remains across dimensions. Then he repeated the question. He wanted to know if Dae-soo had conspired with Pandemonium, if he was involved in Min, Jun's death, and if he had done anything against his disciples. At that moment, Dae-soo began to laugh. He called Siwoo a mad dog and said he reeked of slaughter and bloodlust. He explained that he had been using his position to compete with strong hunters from all over the world and grow even more powerful. The presence of an old rival like Siwoo no longer provoked even the slightest shiver. To him, answering the question was meaningless, since he was the type who risked his life just to feel his blood boil in a good fight. Siwoo, even more irritated, said that maybe he would need to open another hole in Dae-soo's mouth to make him talk. But before the two could explode into combat, Kyung-hoo stepped between them. He reminded them that they were both SS rank hunters, national representatives, and asked if they realized the impact a fight between them would cause in a civilian area. He said Daesu needed to understand the responsibility of his position, and the same went for Siwoo. Times had changed. This was no longer a lawless land. Battles between hunters now drew public attention and national repercussions. Even so, Siwoo replied that if Kyung-hoo didn't want to be bothered, he had better get out of the way. Daesu commented that Siwoo was still the same annoying guy as always, and that he missed the old days when fighting and killing were natural, without hesitation. Back then, they were always testing their skills. But now, everything seemed monotonous. Daesu then stated that he would answer Siwoo in exchange for a fleeting rush of blood. He assured him he had no involvement in Min Jun's death. He said that Kang Yo-hwa had gone to him of her own accord, and that it wasn't his fault if Siwoo's disciples were weak. Finally, he stated that if Siwoo had more questions, he should come to him officially next time. He himself would prepare a place where Siwoo could attack him without restrictions. Kyung-hoo let out a sigh of relief. The tension had diminished, at least for the moment. The scene then shifted. One of Daesu's subordinates reported detecting a strange sound, but Daesu ordered him to remain silent, claiming there was no one on that continent capable of threatening him. The man apologized, and Daesu then ordered them to contact Muryang Daesu, requesting the preparation of an A-rank gate. He also demanded that Kang Yo-hwa be brought to him. The story then rewound 7 hours earlier. Sejun recalled the words of Kang Yo-hwa. She had said that several hunter corpses had been found near a certain gate. During autopsies, they discovered that their internal organs had been corrupted at a cellular level. It seemed like the work of someone with an extremely rare and specialized ability. The bigger problem was that all those hunters were connected to a mysterious trading guild called IZ. According to her, this guild operated discreetly near the area where the gate had appeared. Despite its quiet activity, she had never heard of them before. There were rumors that IZ's leader was, in fact, a demon. Kang Yo-hwa said that whether Sejun believed it or not was his choice, but she assured him that she would continue investigating the matter on her own. She would inform him as soon as she discovered something new. For safety, she also advised him not to contact her until she reached out first, since Daesu was closely watching her guild. As she turned to leave, Sejun, confused and curious, asked why she was doing all this. Kang Yo-hwa only asked him not to tell his master anything. She stated that she didn't intend to return anymore. Upon hearing that, Sejun reflected. That was typical of Yo-hwa, who had spent 10 years at Choi Daesu's side in silence, and it certainly wasn't by chance. The doubt that consumed him was, why was she doing this now? He realized that everything had started to change after Siwoo's return. His brother had always deeply trusted his 3 direct disciples, but to see Jun's eyes, each of them seemed to carry a secret burden. For this reason, he had never fully trusted anyone. Even so, he couldn't understand what Yo-hwa really intended. At that moment, Siwoo entered the room and asked if Yo-hwa had said anything. Sejun, torn, hesitated to answer. Siwoo, noticing his confusion, asked him not to hide anything. He wanted to know what was going on with Yo-hwa. The scene shifted again. Some men remarked that His Excellency wished to see Kang Yo-hwa. With no choice, she accepted. She said it was fine, and that she would go to him. The narrative then leapt back 10 years, shortly after Siwoo's disappearance. Choi Daesu was in direct conversation with a demon. He asked if the demon really wanted to cooperate in erasing Siwoo's memory. The demon confirmed, explaining that Siwoo was someone who had even threatened a 4th-level demon king to death. He himself was a subordinate of a 2nd-level demon king known as Rikatan. He said that maintaining the authority of the demon kings, controlling the others through absolute dependence, was essential. A human defeating a demon king represented a humiliating and dangerous record for the stability of the demonic system. Since a negotiation had already been concluded, it would be in their mutual interest for demons to begin living in a more tempered way. Choi Daesu, however, replied that all of that was nonsense. The war had been won by humans, and the only existing treaty was to help recover from the damage caused by demons. He asked if there was any real reason for him to listen to that proposal. The demon mentioned that he had been watching SS rank hunters and had been keeping an eye on Choi Daesu for a long time. He claimed that Daesu seemed to regret the end of the war. A new power had been discovered, with virtually limitless potential. The days of acting without restraint were coming to an end, and perhaps Daesu still longed to fight truly powerful enemies. For that reason, the demon said, he could help him reach the pinnacle of mana. Even so, Daesu rejected the offer. He thought it was nothing but an excuse to erase the humiliation of the demon king. He questioned, if he truly became stronger, wouldn't he then become a threat to the demon race itself? Why then would the demon help him? The demon explained that demons lived far longer than humans. They weren't seeking temporary victories, but rather to understand the reality of mana, absolute power, and the gates that connected dimensions. Before departing, he declared that he would await a positive answer from the strongest hunter in South Korea, Choi Daesu. Shortly after, an exclusive F-rank gate appeared, belonging to the Muryang Guild. A man reported to Choi Dae-soo that, as ordered, he had prepared an empty gate, with no research value. The area was guild property, with restricted public access. It was confirmed that no forms of life were inside. Dae-soo praised the work and ordered everyone to leave at once. He confirmed if the invitation to the summit meeting for the following day had been sent. The man replied that it had. Not long after, Kang Yo-hwa arrived and asked why he had called her. Choi Dae-soo said that she probably believed he had played a key role in Siwoo's disappearance. He revealed that at the time, even though he hadn't accepted the demon's proposal, he also did nothing when Siwoo's records began to vanish. For him, whether Siwoo disappeared or not was not his concern. Yo-hwa, outraged, demanded to know what he meant, but Dae-soo was blunt. His only concern was being sure that he was stronger than Siwoo. He then launched an attack against her and asked if she really thought he had gone insane. Wounded, Yo-hwa accused him of being involved in her master's disappearance. Choi Dae-soo, smiling, said she was just like her mother, temperamental, cowardly, and deceitful, always clinging to her enemies out of convenience. He said her mind was far too slow to grasp reality. Then he struck a powerful blow, hurling her far away. Dae-soo said his old inferiority complex had haunted him for a long time, but it had vanished along with the disappearance of the mad dog. Even so, that past had always remained as a stain on his life. Now that Siwoo had returned, he wanted to rid himself completely of those remnants. Yo-hwa, rising to her feet again, asked if he really thought her master would resort to dirty tricks because of her. He stepped on her shoulder and replied that he was certain of it. He said that in the past, Siwoo wasted far too much time with emotions like family, and when he looked into his eyes after 10 years, he became sure of it. That was why she needed to serve as bait. Dae-soo stated that he knew nothing about Min Jun's death, but that now he needed to use every card available. Activating an ability, he bound Yo-hwa with special chains. He explained that even S-rank hunters could not easily break them. The chains absorbed mana, and the more she resisted, the more her core would corrode. If she continued, she would end up crippled. Even so, Yo-hwa did not back down. She said none of that changed the fact that he was still trash. But to her surprise, Siwoo suddenly appeared and attacked Choi Dae-soo without hesitation. Choi Dae-soo, with a confident smile on his face, declared that from that moment on, history would be rewritten the right way. The heroes of the past, now obsolete, would die there. The true narrative would begin with the truth. Choi Dae-soo was the strongest man on earth, but Siwoo, also smiling, said that was nothing but nonsense. He then unleashed his power with such intensity that even Dae-soo was surprised. Still, Dae-soo insisted that Siwoo was weak, and that the 10 years that had passed had only deepened the gap between them. Frey, at that moment, was watching with deep concern. He felt that the man standing before Siwoo was a true monster. Worse, his companion was still not fully recovered. Siwoo, however, said there was no time to think. He looked at Frey and told him they were going all out with everything they had. Frey, alarmed, asked if he had lost his mind. After all, Siwoo had not even recovered half of his true mana. On top of that, Frey could feel that this opponent was the strongest he had ever faced. He didn't even know if he could devour the abilities of someone like that. Frey also warned about the side effects if they pushed their power to the limit. But Siwoo replied that 50% was enough, because that was what he had used during his time in the demon world. Choi Dae-soo, noticing Siwoo whispering something, asked if he was already praying, knowing he was about to die. But Siwoo charged forward with full force, saying that was all it would take to finish him. Thus began a fierce battle between the two. Kang Yo-hwa, still injured and bound, watched in awe. This was a true battle between first-generation hunters. The speed of the blows was such that she could barely keep up with her eyes. She knew there was a difference in power between the two, but she never imagined it was this great. Choi Dae-soo, summoning a spear, remarked that it had been a long time since he had last felt this, the pure collision of mana's essence. Siwoo retorted, saying that even after 10 years, Dae-soo's sick hobby of collecting weapons and artifacts hadn't changed. Frey, watching it all, wondered if that man was even human. He was on the level of a high-ranking demon. The spear he wielded didn't seem like an ordinary artifact either. But Siwoo answered that Dae-soo was nothing more than an incomplete human, and easily held the spear with a single hand. When Dae-soo began summoning multiple weapons and hurling them at him, Siwoo activated his shield, blocking all the attacks. Dae-soo then grabbed a hammer and declared that the shield was far too fragile. But at that instant, Siwoo activated his ice spear ability, forcing Dae-soo back. The opponent laughed, saying that, as expected, the master would not die so easily. But he also declared that it wasn't enough, that he could unleash even greater destruction. He said all of this already justified the value of that, referring to Yo-hwa, and added that the daughter of a serial killer did not deserve a more honorable fate. Yo-hwa, humiliated and bound, began to cry, begging him to shut up. Siwoo, alert, told her not to move too much or she would only hurt herself further. Dae-soo was genuinely impressed by Siwoo's power. It was exactly this kind of power he wanted to feel directly on his skin. As he said this, he declared that the battle would resume, but Siwoo wasted no time. He lunged forward and told him to shut his mouth. Dae-soo, however, noticed that the way Siwoo controlled mana had completely changed. Its density was different. He said that Siwoo's cowardly style of manipulating mana to produce abilities hadn't changed in 10 years. Siwoo replied that he didn't expect to hear that from someone who didn't even understand the basics of combat tactics. Dae-soo retorted, saying that Siwoo had been far too young back then. He then threw a knife near Siwoo's foot and commented that the last blow had shown him a clear truth. Siwoo was no longer his equal. Immediately after, he activated a chain ability that bound Siwoo's legs. With him immobilized, Dae-soo launched a powerful strike. When the dust settled, Siwoo said that of everything Dae-soo had spoken, that was the only thing that made sense, and he proved it by holding the attack back with just one hand. Dae-soo froze. The strike had been delivered with a legendary sword, capable of cutting through entire buildings, and yet, Siwoo hadn't even budged. Siwoo then explained that while Dae-soo had spent 10 years fighting, he had spent 100 years inside the demon world. Without giving him time to react, Siwoo landed a devastating punch square in Dae-soo's face, sending him crashing to the ground. Lying there, Dae-soo said it was fascinating. He couldn't even remember the last time he had bled, and he realized that Siwoo had not revealed his full mana from the beginning. Now, he would have to start fighting seriously. He explained that about 5 years ago, all officially registered S-rank hunters worldwide had been forced to wear special bracelets. These bracelets restricted mana and abilities to prevent severe damage to society. The moment someone removed such a device without government authorization, they were considered a criminal. It was exactly the kind of situation Siwoo hated. He looked at Choi Dae-soo and said that a dog collar suited him perfectly. He asked if that was the stupid reason he had taken that position, just to get government authorization and join a dogfight. Choi Dae-soo, with a firm gaze, replied that Siwoo was underestimating him too much. That couldn't be the only reason for him to hold that position. He admitted that he had never had the chance to test his true strength, and that this moment was his opportunity. Siwoo told him to stop talking and show what he had. With that, the two unleashed their abilities, and the clash of energies was so intense that the ground began to crack under the sheer pressure of mana. Kang Yo-hwa, still injured, realized that the gate would not withstand such instability for much longer. If she didn't act, her master's power could reach civilians and cause a disaster. She knew she had to stop it as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the battle between the two raged on with extreme balance. Frey said that his stomach felt a little nauseous, but strangely enough, he was feeling good. Even though Siwoo was using only half of his potential, the level of power was something entirely different. It was like watching the true manifestation of a superior ability. Dae-soo, in turn, began to question whether there really was a difference in strength between them after releasing their limits, but he could not accept it as truth. He began laughing uncontrollably, declaring it impossible. He hurled his spear at Siwoo with full force, but, to everyone's surprise, the spear transformed into a tiger that bit down on Siwoo's arm. Siwoo immediately realized that a demon was sealed inside that artifact. Without hesitation, he activated Frey's ability, the gift of domination, and managed to take control of the tiger, turning it to his side. Choi Dae-soo, watching everything, began to wonder what that bastard had been doing all these years. Kang Yo-hwa, meanwhile, finally managed to free herself and shouted for them to stop. She said the gate was on the verge of collapse, and that if it happened, Dae-soo would be taken straight to trial. While he had been losing his mind, she had already contacted the HMCS, and they were on their way. The gate would be reopened soon. At that moment, Choi Dae-soo's communicator began to ring. He answered, and on the other side was Edward, from HMCS's international headquarters. He said Dae-soo needed to appear immediately, as there was an urgent matter. Choi Dae-soo, extremely frustrated, replied that he was already on his way. He said the fun was over for now. Meanwhile, Kang Yo-hwa collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by anguish. She thought to herself that she didn't want Siwoo to discover any of this. Even if she died, she didn't want to betray her master in any way. Siwoo, noticing her condition, went to her and asked if she was okay, if she had been hurt. At the sound of her master's voice, Yo-hwa could no longer hold back her emotions. She began to cry and hugged him tightly. The scene shifted once again. It showed Choi Dae-soo in direct conversation with members of HMCS, stating that, as confirmed, there had been no violation of the law. Since HMCS had been contacted by a hunter and not by the association, the chaos caused was technically not his fault. Dae-soo questioned whether all this wasn't an overreaction, considering his position. He addressed the man as Sir Blackwood. The blonde man was Edward Blackwood, vice president of HMCS's international headquarters. He stated that if Dae-soo hadn't removed the control device, the situation would be different. High-ranking hunters were forbidden from participating in private fights, and if it became necessary to remove the limiter, it had to be officially reported to the association, or directly to HMCS. He also said that using mana against someone from HMCS was grounds for immediate arrest, And, considering Daesu's position as the leader of a nation, he could even be brought before the International Tribunal. Even if no laws were violated in his country of origin, international law allowed for formal complaints based on the risks presented. However, in times of peace, that episode could not be made into public uproar. That's why Edward asked Daesu to resolve everything independently and discreetly within Korea. Furthermore, he stated that even if they decided to let the incident slide, it would still be necessary to hear the other party involved. He wanted to meet the man who had managed to fight on equal terms with Choi Daesu, since that meant he was also an SS rank hunter. Choi Daesu, surprised, asked if Siwoo had been Edward's true objective all along, but Edward Blackwood simply bid him a cold farewell and hung up on him. Daesu was consumed by rage. He felt utterly humiliated. He had already sensed the difference in strength between them 10 years ago, but now he believed he could surpass him. During his absence, he had grown much stronger, as if he had transformed into a completely different species. Even after all those years, Daesu had trained constantly to become stronger, but he still could not comprehend the overwhelming gap in power between him and Siwoo, and that made him restless. He wondered what the hell Siwoo had done all that time. Was that sealed power not enough? It had been so long since Daesu had a goal worth breaking that seal, for to welcome back the true Mad Dog. A week later, at Xianghwa's guild headquarters, Siwoo appeared and said he already knew Yohua was there, but asked why she hadn't greeted him. Embarrassed, she replied that she was very happy with her master's return, but didn't know how to act. Siwoo then wanted to know if she had investigated Min Jun's case, and Yohua explained that, unfortunately, she had found nothing. All she knew for sure was that the crime hadn't been committed by anyone from that country. According to her, the reason Daesu kept her around was personal, and there was no evidence that he had done anything to meet him. She emphasized that she wasn't defending Daesu just because they were blood relatives. Siwoo retorted that if Daesu truly saw her as family, he would never have done that to her. Yohua, however, said it was fine, that it no longer bothered her. But Siwoo insisted that it wasn't about being fine or not. It was about the fact that she was bound to a lineage she never chose. He said that even if her mother had been a criminal or anything else, it had nothing to do with her. She had done nothing wrong, and if she still felt guilty about it, she should start living with pride. He promised to help her, no matter what happened. Crying, Yohua confessed that she could never survive on her own. Still, she apologized for constantly worrying Si-jun. From Si-jun's point of view, it must have been very hard to trust her, considering she had been hiding so many things from the beginning. Siwoo, in turn, remarked that his brother had always been cautious, and asked that they talk better the next day when they met. Embarrassed, Yohua asked if it really had to be the next day. Siwoo replied that yes, because now they were all adults. He didn't know if Daesu had dealt with all the consequences, but at least things had calmed down for the moment. When he picked up his phone, Siwoo saw 9 missed calls from Jung-gu. He took it as a sign of Jung-gu's sharpness. Soon after, Jung-gu appeared in person, demanding to know why he hadn't answered. Beside him was Gunho, who said he had received a call from HMCS's international headquarters. Vice President Blackwood was coming to South Korea to meet Siwoo personally. Siwoo simply commented that it was a nuisance and asked why Edward wanted to see him. Gunho explained that a gag order had been issued for everyone involved, so he didn't know many details. However, since Siwoo's name was mentioned directly, he thought Siwoo might know something. It was the first time something like that had ever happened in South Korea. He then asked Siwoo what the hell was going on, but Siwoo replied that he couldn't say anything at the moment. Gunho accepted the answer and said they would contact him later. For now, the best thing to do was wait at that station. Before leaving, Gunho asked Jung-gu to investigate everything that was happening and to find out why Hwa was on his side in that situation. Jung-gu answered that he really didn't know anything and warned that from now on, there would be many eyes on them. Shifting the scene, on the street, Siwoo was walking alongside Siru. He asked why she was receiving him so suddenly. She replied that, for her, the grace of a teacher was like the sky, and besides, she was already on her way home. Siwoo wanted to know what she planned to do from now on. Siru stated that if he agreed, she would follow him. Despite appearances, she said she could help him a lot, since she was also a guild leader. At that moment, a black car stopped in front of them. With the window lowered, ISU appeared, drawing everyone's attention. She asked what he was doing there, but Daesu, inside the car, said that if she really intended to keep up this farce of teacher and student, it was better to start listening. Siwoo held Siru gently and assured her he would get in touch later. Then he entered Daesu's car and left. Inside the vehicle, Siwoo asked if he wasn't ashamed after being beaten like a dog. Daesu replied that the fight wasn't over yet and, if I hadn't interfered, he would have surely won. He added that thanks to Siwoo, things had become more interesting and that he had a lot of work ahead of him. Soon, he would obtain an official place of international activity, so it was better to settle everything everything properly. Siwoo refused to accept that proposal. He said firmly that he would never agree to something like that. That was when Daesu mentioned a name long unheard, Pandemonium. He explained that the remnants of that group, which many believed had disappeared, were still active in the world. In fact, the demons that had emerged after Siwoo's disappearance 10 years ago had been contacted by that group, and it was through them that the proposal to help pay for Siwoo's records had surfaced. That indicated the demons knew of his existence. Daesu remarked that the group could be a pseudo-religious sect, depending on an unknown power or perhaps a secret arm of the demons themselves. Since Pandemonium spread and the demons were pushed into the polar regions, most traces of them on the planet vanished. That's why several officials around the world, including Daesu, began monitoring their movements closely. However, no more relevant news had surfaced about them. Still, Daesu said he had heard reports of a group of half-demons living in the Middle Eastern desert. Siwoo asked if half-demons really existed. Daesu confirmed, explaining that since humans had been in contact with demons for a long time, children were eventually born from that union. These half-demons looked like ordinary humans, without horns or wings, but they were known for using dark magic. Daesu added that the more dangerous a planet was, the higher the classification of its gates. It was difficult even to obtain permission to enter them, especially from other countries. He then confronted Siwoo, saying that he himself had used dark magic and asked if, during his 10 years of disappearance, he had allied with the demons. Siwoo immediately denied it, but Daesu countered, saying that even he, who had always hated demons, had ended up getting involved with them. Tired of the conversation, Siwoo asked for the car to stop immediately. As soon as he stepped out, he looked at Daesu and said seriously that he needed to make one thing clear. He had no intention of allying with those filthy demons, and even less of getting involved with a battle maniac like him. He told him to stop with those tricks and to speak plainly when he wanted to die, and then to go apologize to Yohua. Daesu, however, only remarked that he knew about Siwoo's unpleasant hobby and how much he liked the weak to caress his feet. He questioned why he still insisted on creating bonds with people, since one day he could deeply regret it. Siwoo replied that it was none of his business, so Daesu left. But the words half-demon still echoed in his mind, making him remember a specific body. The scene then shifted. Some people were gathered, commenting that the international headquarters was really there. Everyone was confused, not understanding why this was happening. At that moment, Gunho introduced Siwoo to Edward. He greeted Siwoo, referring to him as the hunter, Min Siwoo. But Siwoo immediately sensed something strange and asked what kind of trick that was. Edward said he wanted to speak with him in private. Gunho, though curious, knew that if he interfered with that conversation now, he could lose his only chance to become an executive at headquarters. So he left the two of them alone. Once alone, Edward grabbed Siwoo by the collar and asked, with anger and emotion, where he had been during the past 10 years. Smiling, Siwoo told him to calm down. Edward then confessed that he was very happy with his return, but wanted to know exactly where he had been all this time. After a long talk, Siwoo told everything again, once more, now to another person. Edward admitted it was a hard story to believe, but considering that gates opened in that land, it wasn't entirely impossible. It was surprising to think that someone who had once been one of the most important figures in the world now had his very existence nearly forgotten. Siwoo remarked that at least Edward still remembered his name, and Edward replied that he could never forget, since Siwoo had saved his life several times during that chaotic period. Siwoo then asked how Edward had come into contact with Yohua. Edward explained that HMCS headquarters was investigating a case involving several guilds around the world, and the Qianghua Guild was one of them. Due to its recent good performance, he gained access to special contacts and proposed that Siwoo go with him to headquarters. But Siwoo refused immediately. Edward, shocked by the answer, asked why. He said he needed someone trustworthy like him by his side. Siwoo thanked him for the trust, but explained that he was investigating a case independently. Edward said he could help with that, since HMCS headquarters' investigation was much more powerful than Siwoo imagined. Siwoo replied that he would think about it, and he took the opportunity to ask what that joint investigation was about. Edward explained that recently there had been an incident with multiple victims, involving hunters inside and around a gate, discovered in a desert region. The autopsy of the bodies revealed deaths by poisoning. They had ingested something mysterious, and Edward suspected the cause was some kind of illegal drug. The revelation left Siwoo surprised. He wanted to better understand those awakened drugs, and asked Edward what exactly they were. Edward explained that there was still no concrete evidence that such drugs really existed, but a confidential investigation had been ongoing since the deaths of several hunters. This case had already lasted about half a year. During the autopsy, it was discovered that the victims' internal organs had been corrupted at the cellular level, and most of them were awakened criminals. This made a public announcement of the case difficult. To make things worse, no physical traces of the substances were found. which left the investigation even more stuck. It was only when a witness appeared in China that a new lead emerged. According to the testimony, the dead awakened had inhaled a substance called black powder. After that, they entered an extreme state of rage and self-destructed. The hunters who inhaled that black powder began to emit an enormous amount of mana and had their abilities amplified beyond expectations. Siwoo then asked if the black powder was an illegal drug aimed at enhancing awakened individuals, and if it was linked to the desert incident. Edward confirmed that not only was it related, but it was probably the starting point of the entire situation. Siwoo, confused, questioned how that could be the beginning if the case records were already over half a year old. Edward explained that in the desert region, a portal had been discovered with several victims around it. Right at the entrance, the Cheonghua Guild had found black powder for the first time. Furthermore, near the portal, a vehicle belonging to the commercial guild IZ was found, which was considered suspicious. Although it seemed small and without evident illegal activity, its connection to the site was disturbing. Siwoo acknowledged that all of this was truly concerning. Edward then commented that he already knew that girl was his disciple. Since the investigation was secret and Yohua was the one who found the drug first, she couldn't be removed from the case. Edward stated that if Siwoo helped Yohua, they could greatly reduce the impact of the incident. However, if the disciple were caught, the situation would become extremely dangerous. He asked if Siwoo would really pretend not to know anything. Siwoo replied that it was fine, since he also had business in the Middle East. Edward was very relieved and said he would help Siwoo with anything, but he wanted to know what exactly had happened with ISU's president, Choi Dae-soo, and said he was willing to take drastic measures. Siwoo, however, calmly replied that there was no need for that. He asked him to leave the old man alone, since he was just a useless man obsessed with power. Even so, he was still human. The scene then shifted. Siwoo already had his bags packed. Sejun asked if he was going to take part in the international headquarters investigation. Siwoo replied by asking if he remembered Edward, since he was the one who asked him to investigate the case on his own. Sejun asked how he had gotten in contact with that man, but Siwoo said it was complicated and that he would explain later. Before the conversation could continue, Sejun received a call and left. On the other end of the line was Yohua. Meanwhile, Frey asked where they were going. Siwoo answered that the first destination was Europe, where HMCS headquarters was located. Worried, Frey asked him not to overexert his mana like last time. Siwoo, not understanding, asked if he was concerned about expenses or about what he would eat, but Frey clarified that the concern was something else. Food didn't matter. The real risk was Siwoo's physical condition. Since returning to Earth, Siwoo had been gradually adapting to the planet's mana. Because of that, his energy output had increased greatly, but his control over realms was quickly diminishing. The side effects of dimensional travel hadn't only affected Siwoo but also Frey. The main trigger for that was likely the full release of mana production in the last battle. Since there was a contract between them in that world, Frey could not attack Siwoo, as he was the host. However, in the future, the symptoms could worsen. The side effects were unpredictable, and there could come a time when Frey would no longer be able to lend his power during critical moments. Siwoo, however, said that he wasn't relying on Frey's power now, so it didn't make a difference. Indignant, Frey reacted to the disdain, but Siwoo explained that if they truly faced demons in the future, yes, he would need his strength. But for now, it wasn't something to worry about. He added that the fight against Choi Dae-soo had been more useful than he expected, but something about that awakened enhancement drug bothered him. The sensation it caused felt strangely familiar. 2 days later, the scene shifted to HMCS International Headquarters. Two women were talking, commenting that Edward was completely unpredictable, and that the Asian team was already more than enough with Hikari. The woman's name was Hayakawa Hikari, leader of Team 1 of the Tokyo branch. Her brother often proudly mentioned that she was the youngest person ever to join HMCS Japan, and had already become an investigations leader. He would joke, saying maybe there was nothing in this world that a young, beautiful woman like her couldn't do. Beside her was Lila, a blonde woman who led the #1 investigation team of HMCS International Headquarters. Lila commented that it would have been better if Yohua were in her place, but Hikari heard the comment perfectly, since both were using headsets with simultaneous translation. At that moment, a man arrived, informing them that Director Leone had requested a meeting in the main conference room. Hikari remarked that the unprecedented parachutist had finally arrived. The man confirmed that he had just landed at the airport, together with Vice President Edward. That surprised Layla, who wanted to know why the Vice President was present at that meeting, and who exactly that hunter was. Was he really a member of HMCS? The man confirmed that yes, he was from HMCS's South Korea branch, and his name was Min Siwoo. The meeting began shortly after, with a brief introduction of the representatives: Siwoo, from the Korean branch, Lila and Stefan, from the European branch, and Hikari, representing the Asian branch. Since the Vice President had to step out for a few minutes, Layla decided to start the case briefing. She began by explaining the so-called case of illegal awakened enhancement drugs. Investigation Team 1 had gone to the location where the original substance had been found. The gate in the region was ranked A, and around it 6 awakened corpses had been discovered. It was in one of those bodies that the substance was detected, but inside the gate, no evidence was found. Layla stated that after the investigation ended, an official decision would be made regarding the release of permissions for gate invaders. She also reported that, in another location, a vehicle belonging to the commercial guild IZ had been found, a small organization operating in the Middle East. At first, their activities seemed harmless and drew little attention. Still, the team chose to deepen the investigation in that area. While listening to the explanation, Siwoo remained silent but reflected on the possibility of demons or half-demons being involved. For him, if the drug was of human origin, it would be easier to trace the source, especially if it involved specific abilities. He believed that the commercial guild was extremely suspicious and wanted to investigate leads prior to the incident. Hikari, however, did not understand why he was deviating from the official investigation data. Siwoo made it clear that he was there to ascertain the facts on his own, and that his goal was to find out if there was any connection with information he already knew. Hikari countered, saying that none of that had been mentioned by headquarters, and if it were relevant, it would have already been officially addressed. In addition, she showed discomfort with Siwoo's presence. To her, he was just a stranger, with no ties to any branch or guild, suspiciously involved in an international investigation. And, as if that weren't enough, he still spoke of demons, a subject she considered outdated and irrelevant in that context. Hikari stressed that it had already been 10 years since humans had begun cooperating with certain demon factions, and that Siwoo was merely fueling old prejudices with an outdated mindset. Stefan, noticing the tension, tried to ease the situation. Layla intervened, asking everyone to set aside their differences and reminding them that each of them was an elite professional in their field. They needed to work together to find a quick solution. Soon after, the team began preparing for the next stage. A flight was already arranged to take them to an Arctic region. Even so, Hikari remained quite irritated with Siwoo. To her, he was arrogant and seemed to receive direct privileges from Vice President Edward, which only added to her frustration. Layla tried to explain that Siwoo was, in fact, extremely experienced, despite the initial impression. But Hikari remained resistant, suspicious, and bothered by his presence. While waiting in the break room, Siwoo reflected in silence. That case would be complicated not only because of the investigation itself, but also due to the tense atmosphere within the team. Shortly after, Vice President Edward entered the room and asked about the team's performance so far. Siwoo replied that, although some members were quite irritating, it didn't bother him as long as they didn't interfere with the progress of the work. Edward, who already knew Siwoo's way well, laughed and said that he hadn't changed at all in 10 years. He only asked that he avoid causing trouble, reminding him that he would have the full support of HMCS International Headquarters. At the Middle East branch, they were received with cordiality. Everything was already prepared: accommodations, transportation, and structure for the investigation. Even so, Siwoo found it strange not to sense any trace of demonic presence in the city, especially considering the strong density of mana the place had. Perhaps, for Siwoo, Layla was wrong about all of this. Still, Hikari kept provoking him at every opportunity, which made the investigation much more tiring and exhausting. Wasting no time, the protagonist decided to act on his own. He walked through the city streets, spoke with local residents, and discovered only one important piece of information: half-demons were almost indistinguishable from humans. The only reliable way to identify them was with a mana analyzer. As for the IZ Guild, none of the locals in that region seemed to know of it or had even heard of it. Meanwhile, Frey observed, intrigued, the fact that Siwoo was walking alone through such a remote city, unlike the other investigators who preferred to always move in groups. But for him, walking alone was simply a way to make better use of his free time. During his walk, Layla eventually ran into Siwoo and asked why he was there, since he could be resting in the accommodations provided by the local headquarters. Siwoo replied that he was just taking the time to ask some questions on his own, and took the opportunity to ask why she was also alone. Layla explained that Stefan had gone to obtain the entry permit for the gate, since the full risk assessment had not yet been completed. During the conversation, Layla commented that she didn't remember seeing him during her last visit to Korea. Siwoo replied that he had joined recently as a simple recruit. Even so, she found it very strange. The way he behaved, his posture, his presence, everything gave the impression of a hunter with 20 years of experience, and that made her suspicious. That was when Siwoo mentioned that he had once worked with Hans Schroeder. Upon hearing that name, Layla was visibly startled. She showed a picture on her tablet and asked if he was referring to that man. When Siwoo saw the image, he confirmed respond with a simple yes. It was indeed him. Hans Schroeder was, in fact, Layla's uncle. She had never imagined he had connections with hunters from Asia, and the strangest part was that Siwoo seemed to be exactly the same age as Hans, which made her even more suspicious. Siwoo, noticing this, gave an improvised excuse, trying to change the subject. Layla then revealed that Hans had been in a coma for 2 years, hospitalized as a victim of gate syndrome, a poorly understood condition, like many others associated with mana and gate dimensions. In addition, there were infections and side effects still unexplained. Her uncle had suffered greatly from it. During a mission, he had been searching for a missing colleague when he was caught off guard by an attack. He ended up trapped inside a gate for a long time. When the rescue team finally found him, Hans was already unconscious. Since then, his life had only been sustained thanks to the abilities of high-level healers. Layla wanted desperately to help him. That's why, in her free time, she risked herself in high-rank gates, always searching for some rare elixir that could save her uncle. But so far, she hadn't found anything at all. He was the last living member of her family, and that was her greatest reason to continue that mission. Not long after, Stefan returned with the news that the permit to enter the gate had been approved. The team then took a car provided by headquarters and headed toward the designated location. These gates were in fact dimensional portals. What existed inside them was unpredictable. The climate, the weather, the vegetation, even the creatures, everything operated in a way completely different from the real world. There was no way to foresee what they might encounter within. During the trip, Hikari didn't miss the chance to provoke Siwoo, who was already losing patience. The mere sound of her voice was starting to irritate him, but as soon as they arrived at their destination, everyone fell silent before the colossal sight of the gate's entrance. It was imposing and silent. The surrounding area had already been completely isolated and cleared. However, the traces of mana, which should have once been intense, had vanished. Everything indicated that someone had erased the vestiges on purpose, as if wanting to hide something. Even so, Hikari and Kumo tried to rush ahead and stay in front of everyone, but there were mysterious observers watching the group's every move. The clock showed exactly 5:40 p.m. The gate had been classified as A rank, but the goal of that mission wasn't to confront it directly, it was to investigate clues related to the illegal enhancement drug. To do that, Layla activated her special ability, called Tree Creation. The mana from her body connected with the earth, and roots spread far around the area. Through them, she could feel the energy circulating in the ground and detect the presence of living spirits. The result, however, was strange. There was no magical activity within a 30-kilometer radius. Because of this, the team decided to split up to widen the search area. The protagonist didn't understand why they had formed a group if, in the end, everyone preferred to act alone. During his investigation, he found a strange dirt on the ground, something that carried distorted mana and had clearly been placed there on purpose. Suspicious, he contacted Red Demon, the bald man who had been watching everything from a distance since Siwoo arrived in the country. The informant reported that everything was going according to plan, but warned about the presence of 5 suspicious individuals near the gate entrance. Upon hearing this, Siwoo ordered to be informed immediately if they entered. However, Red Demon pointed out an important detail. Those individuals didn't seem like ordinary enemies. Meanwhile, Kumo reported that his sister had already searched the entire area and found nothing, not even monsters. Hikari, quite irritated with the lack of progress, concluded that maybe the victims hadn't even entered the gate. If they had, there should be footage of the moment. Still, she firmly believed that something valuable was hidden in that location. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much secrecy surrounding the area. Determined not to return empty-handed, Hikari decided to act on her own. She summoned her ability and overturned the entire ground at once. The impact was so intense that a loud boom echoed throughout the region. Layla heard the sound from afar, and Stefan ran over to check what was going on. Hikari's boldness, however, came at a high price. From the soil began to emerge several corpses, but these weren't ordinary bodies. They were creatures that fed on darkness, distorting their own life essence. They were undead, and they were ready to attack everyone around. Chaos quickly spread. Under pressure, Hikari decided to unleash her trump card, the ability of the Divine Spirit, Kagutsuchi. This was an S-rank technique, and as soon as it was activated, a massive fire serpent appeared by her side. The creature lunged at the enemies, and in seconds, dozens of undead were annihilated. However, there was a problem. For every creature destroyed, another emerged in its place, forming an apparently endless cycle. Just as Hikari was about to be attacked from behind, Stefan appeared to save her, slicing through the enemies with absurd precision. He had no idea what was going on, and even Hikari couldn't understand. After all, she had used detection magic and nothing had reacted. How then was it possible that so many corpses were hidden underground? But there was no time for questions. Kumo activated his own Divine Spirit ability, Kamaitachi, the Weasel Demon, an extremely fast and sharp entity. He launched into battle with ferocity but soon realized something alarming. If he didn't completely destroy the creatures' heads, they kept moving. The battle was becoming increasingly desperate. Kumo was even bitten, and he, Hikari, and Stefan no longer believed they could hold out much longer. That was when Siwoo entered the scene. From afar, he unleashed his ability, causing mana arrows to rain down, piercing directly into the undead's heads, knocking them down one by one and preventing them from getting back up. Amidst all the chaos, the only thing Hikari wanted to know was who exactly that man was. Stefan, completely exhausted, believed it was best to retreat and return the next day with a proper response team. Siwoo, on the other hand, was clearly annoyed. He didn't like Hikari's behavior at all, since she simply destroyed the scene and made the investigation much harder. It was at that moment that another group approached. Hikari noticed that Layla was not among them. Stefan tried to contact her, but received no answer. Without wasting time, the protagonist ran toward the last place she might have been, before it was too late. At the same time, he contacted Red Demon and ordered the old man to enter the portal immediately. Since the enemies had already crossed, all they had to do was follow the tracks left behind to locate them. Meanwhile, Layla was in trouble. Her hands were tied, and her mouth was sealed, preventing her from making any sound. She couldn't understand how those men had managed to get in, since the entrance was supposed to be completely secure. However, she soon realized she was being kept alive as bait. The group's goal was to seize control of the country's black market, using the drug to enrich themselves and expand their organization on a colossal scale. One of the men, a necromancer named Ivan, amused himself by summoning corpses. He was responsible for the undead that had appeared earlier. His ability mocked life and death, defying human reason. It was a forbidden technique, detested even among hunters. Merely possessing it was reason enough to be hunted down. From a distance, a bearded man watched the scene with unease. He had never witnessed someone conjuring in such a way, even suspecting that the necromancer might not even be human. Still, for now, they needed to maintain ties with him. The organization he had inherited from his father, called Almacht, demanded such alliances. The bearded man carried with him a small vial containing the drug in question. A subordinate suggested he try it, but he was harshly reprimanded. He knew how dangerous it was. A single dose could raise someone's ability almost to the level of an S-class hunter, but the addiction was immediate. The body wouldn't endure for long, exploding as it was consumed from within. He had already witnessed that hell with his own eyes. Ivan showed contempt for the subordinates and blamed them for the international agency's discovery of the substance. The bearded man disagreed that had been inevitable. Even so, the necromancer refused to reveal any information about the supply chain, considering it far too dangerous. It was then that Crow appeared. She warned them that they were making too much noise, especially with investigators so close. She also criticized Ivan for gathering all the half-demons within the IS group, putting everyone at risk. The necromancer merely asked her to inform the boss that there was nothing to worry about. But Crow, upon seeing Layla still imprisoned, warned him that he should think more carefully before it was too late. Then, she left. The bespectacled subordinate, named Robert, had no idea what was going on. The bearded man simply told him to pretend he hadn't seen anything. After all, he believed that neither the investigators nor Layla would survive that night. Meanwhile, Stefan, Kumo, and Hikari advanced through the paths overrun with corpses. If not for the protagonist opening the way, the situation would have been fatal. Hikari, confused and restless, wanted to stand out somehow, but everything was spiraling out of her control. Soon, they found Siwoo, who had been acting on his own since the beginning. Stefan asked about Layla, but Siwoo replied that he had found no sign of her, only evidence of a confrontation. For him, it was already clear. Someone had captured the leader, and the corpses were being summoned by the enemy. Without hesitation, he followed the tracks further ahead, with the others at his side. That was when they encountered the bearded man and Robert. Hikari was shocked to see intruders there and, furious over her sister's condition, charged at them. The bearded man countered with his Throne Wolf ability, a fierce strike that forced everyone to dodge. Siwoo, tired of the interruptions, realized he had to act. Hikari could not summon her divine serpent. The cave's space was too narrow, and a collapse would have been inevitable. Unable to fight directly, she used the chaos to search for Layla, but instead came across Ivan, who struck her down with absurd ease. His strength surprised even Kumo, who tried to help Hikari but was repelled. At that moment, the protagonist used the life spirit art and lifted Hikari from the ground. The necromancer was shocked to witness that power, never imagining a human could do such a thing. Meanwhile, Robert fought Kumo directly, keeping him occupied. It was then that Frey realized the enemies before them were not ordinary. The difference in level was obvious, and the group was at a clear disadvantage. Ivan had turned the battlefield into a trap. With a single gesture, he raised all the corpses that had already been defeated. Yet there was something strange. Siwoo seemed to know exactly how to neutralize them, which led Frey to suspect that the hunter might actually be a half-demon. Tired of holding a defensive stance, Siwoo decided to release more of his power. At that moment, Frey, in sync with him, unleashed a powerful wave of lightning that wiped out dozens of enemies in a single strike, leaving Ivan visibly impressed. With his usual mocking tone, Siwoo taunted, saying that for a drug addict, his acquisition of power was a little too obvious. Ivan, enraged, furiously retorted that he had never used that garbage. That was for low-grade humans. It became clear that the drug had been commissioned by someone else. Ivan claimed he was merely fulfilling a job, giving new life to that human trash. According to him, people who consumed the substance became excellent material for his summons. Siwoo, attentive, observed Ivan's mana waves and realized there was no distortion. That indicated the necromancer was telling the truth. He was not the creator of the drug. Someone else was behind it all. With the moon high in the sky, Ivan seemed to grow even stronger. He summoned more corpses and hurled them at the group, trying to overwhelm Siwoo with sheer numbers, forcing him to retreat. But in truth, his goal was to test the limits of his opponent's strength and his ignorance. Siwoo, however, quickly noticed the difference. This wasn't mana, it was demonic energy, the same cursed energy used by half-demons. Without hesitation, he declared that Ivan was one of them. The necromancer reacted with rage, accusing Siwoo of being the real half-breed there. Frey, on the other hand, was intrigued by Ivan's demonic power, recognizing him as an incomplete demon. Despite that, Siwoo remained calm and even consulted Frey mentally, asking if he could use his ultimate attack. Frey hesitated. He feared Siwoo was going too far. Even so, Siwoo didn't hold back. Black chains appeared in his hands, piercing into the animated corpses. Within seconds, all the undead froze, as if disconnected from their source of power. The team then realized those bodies had no will of their own. They were mere puppets in Ivan's hands. The bearded man, who had been watching the battle, was stunned. He demanded that Ivan retaliate, but the necromancer was paralyzed with fear. He couldn't believe a single man was capable of controlling dozens of undead so easily. He desperately needed to uncover Siwoo's true identity. With a direct command, the protagonist turned the corpses back against the necromancer. Ivan tried to defend himself, but couldn't keep up with the pace. In the blink of an eye, Siwoo appeared behind him and struck point blank. But at that moment, Crow appeared and he hadn't expected her interference. She, however, wasn't there to fight. She calmly said that Ivan was an important piece for her and asked Siwoo to let him escape, just this once. She didn't want to face an enemy like him. Siwoo considered Ivan too big a problem to ignore and wanted to end him right there. But there were priorities. He had to ensure his team's safety. Besides, he recognized that Crow was indeed more dangerous than the necromancer. Taking advantage of her presence, Siwoo questioned her directly about the involvement of half-demons. Crow confirmed that there was indeed a moderate faction that had been established for quite some time, but assured him that the current incident had been caused exclusively by Ivan. He had used the faction's name without permission, taking that job on his own. In fact, even she didn't know who had given the initial order. Siwoo found it all ridiculous. She was involved in something whose origin she didn't even understand. Still, Crow insisted that her presence there was solely to guarantee Ivan's survival. She didn't even have a full grasp of the chaos he had caused. With a hardened expression, Siwoo stated coldly that there wouldn't be a second time. Crow, smiling with irony, said that he had trusted her far too quickly. But Siwoo had read her magical signature with precision. He knew lies were being hidden behind a disguised layer of mana, and that enraged him even more. By pressing her, he ended up discovering something essential. Her name was IZ. From that, Siwoo concluded that the half-demons were indeed deeply involved. And if it was only about money, there would be no reason to employ creatures naturally hostile to humans as subordinates. Something much bigger was happening. Stranger still was that drug. Siwoo had felt a sinister power emanating from that woman, but he realized it wasn't demonic energy. The pattern was completely different from anything he had ever seen in that world, which only heightened the need to investigate the Iz Guild. After the confrontation, Lila, rescued by her companions, thanked them for their help, but urged everyone to leave quickly for safety. At that moment, the protagonist admitted that he had lost track of Ivan in the middle of the ambush, unable to determine where he had gone. As the group left the place through the damaged gate, Siwoo tried calling for Frey, but there was no response. 2 days later, already at HMCS headquarters, he reported everything that had happened to Edward. He explained that he had been careless in thinking it was just a simple inspection and apologized for involving an entire team in something so dangerous. Edward, visibly weary, tried to reassure him, saying that no one had expected the situation to escalate in that way. Siwoo explained that he would need to return to Korea, as important commitments awaited him there. He made it clear that if new leads emerged, Edward could contact him at any time. As he left headquarters, he crossed paths with Hikari, who thanked him for having healed her. Visibly embarrassed, she admitted that she had been rude to him the whole time, and promised to try to be more polite next time. However, Siwoo didn't care about that. What truly concerned him was Frey, who had remained silent since the incident. president, and he needed to find a way to awaken him again. Meanwhile, Edward received new information from the Middle East branch. The investigation concluded that the Al-Maqd organization, the same one involved in the attacks on investors, was secretly operating in the illegal drug trade. Although they were not the producers, they were involved in distribution. The local leader had died, temporarily interrupting the supply chain. Even so, traces of that product were still circulating in the market. The gate where everything had happened had been severely damaged by the battles, and was now considered worthless, scheduled to be shut down. However, the most delicate problem was political. The former president's faction could claim that the destruction of the site had been unnecessary. Edward, however, was already exhausted, as the rival faction had taken control of the organization's main headquarters. Among all opponents, the most dangerous was Cargill Wan, a hunter nearly at special rank. He was extremely ambitious and coveted the position of vice president. It was only a matter of time before he tried to exploit the failures of that incident for his own gain. As if foreshadowing, Wan appeared in that very room, feigning informality with everyone. He said he had heard that things hadn't gone as expected, and sarcastically remarked that the team had returned with nothing concrete, only destroying the site. Edward, trying to remain calm, explained that the team had been attacked and was in the process of subduing the enemies when everything happened. But Wan only smiled with disdain. To him, Al-Maqd was an insignificant organization. He mocked them, saying nothing of relevance had been found, and insinuated that perhaps it would be better to make everything public at once. But there was a serious problem with that. If the case were revealed to the public, even ordinary people would learn about the enhancement drug for awakened ones. The demand for it would skyrocket, chaos would become inevitable, and several nations would be affected. Even so, Wan seemed not to care. For him, it was enough to find the supplier and eliminate them, as if it were a simple task. That attitude left Edward furious, but at that moment, he chose to hold back. Later, Edward contacted Siwoo again, and warned that if the investigation became public, it would cause an international crisis. Time was running out, and, to make matters worse, he was still trying to obtain the information that Siwoo so desperately wanted. According to Edward, the gate had been classified as high level, but without proper investigation. All magical resources had been extracted from the site, and no monsters remained there, which led him to suspect that the gate had already been empty, even before Ivan and Al-Maqd's attack. Even so, it was almost impossible to predict the location of an empty gate, and use it to distribute illegal drugs, not even with a top-level shaman. This made Edward question whether that gate was truly real. After hesitating, he began to consider the possibility that everything was a dimensional illusion, a false magic, created solely as a distribution point. It was an extreme theory, but Siwoo trusted his intuition, and believed it made sense. After the conversation, Edward suggested they should train a little, thinking it might help Frey awaken. Siwoo agreed, since he also thought stretching his body wouldn't be a bad idea. Meanwhile, in a crowded nightclub, a red-haired man with tattoos on his neck stood out among the crowd. He was there for business. After passing the security guards with a special password, he met with a man in glasses he hadn't seen in a long time. During their conversation, the red-haired man revealed that with the increase in anti-drug investigations in Korea, he did not intend to return there anytime soon, and that this would be his last deal for a while. Siwoo explained his delay after the deal, saying he had wasted time clearing the way, since imitators were interfering with his business. Nearby, a white-haired man named Zhang Chuen became visibly excited upon seeing the redhead. Chuen then asked Siwoo to bring the merchandise, which was a very full briefcase, justifying the urgency due to pressure from his boss and the need to momentarily interrupt negotiations. Meanwhile, back in Korea, the investigation into the enhancement product had gone public, catching many by surprise. Even the team leader himself felt betrayed for not having been informed beforehand. Faced with the situation, he summoned Siwoo for a meeting with the branch manager, demanding explanations about confirming this information during his business trip, and questioning why the Korean branch had been chosen to obtain those results. The manager's tone made his insecurity clear, as he was extremely concerned about his path toward promotion. He then asked Siwoo not to forget that he was part of the Korean branch, and needed to demonstrate maximum performance. As a drastic measure, the manager announced that the gangbook team, led by Young-gu, would be reassigned to work exclusively on the investigation of these products. This decision surprised everyone. The biggest problem was that if they didn't produce results quickly, the reputation of the entire branch would be at risk. The manager, however, didn't seem concerned about the impact this would have on other teams. His only focus was to secure his chance at promotion. Even so, he was quite excited, since this would be the first official investigation carried out by his new dedicated team. The operation began at full strength. An abandoned warehouse on Manhwa Island became the new point of interest, as suspicious activities had been detected there. there. Unknown bones appeared and disappeared, and there were rumors that the place would become a new distribution hub, attracting criminals from various regions. A violent fight had recently occurred there, resulting in some casualties. Jung-gu, as the new team leader, acknowledged that his group alone would not be enough to handle everything. Fortunately, the branch manager had requested reinforcements from the private guild. As soon as Jung-gu arrived at the site, the reinforcements also showed up. To the protagonist's surprise, the guild was led by someone he already knew. She seemed quite enthusiastic about being involved in the investigation. Sejun wanted to know if the protagonist had come alone, but to him, that idea was absurd. In his view, many of the people present there would just be a burden, and he believed they were simply waiting for the right moment to capture anyone who tried to flee. Meanwhile, Jung-gu remained inside the car with another team member, and Io watched suspiciously, noting that half of the people on site were probably just ordinary citizens interested in acquiring regular awakening medicine. She suspected the fights might only be started by more cunning criminals, suggesting the possibility of a conflict between traffickers or even between guards. The protagonist, however, saw that situation as a perfect opportunity to eliminate other addicts, as a way of making them reflect on their own condition. Just before the action began, they overheard two young men talking. The protagonist quickly hid behind a wall to listen more closely. The men said they were there because they had heard about something incredible, but now they seemed disappointed, claiming it was all more of the same. Even so, they believed the profit from selling that product would be high. One asked the other if he had ever heard of Zhang Xuan, since there were rumors he was in Korea. At that moment, the group of three approached the young men, interested in knowing more about this so-called Zhang Xuan. The two, however, reacted with disdain, asking who the hell they were, and saying that if they were there for the products, they should just enter through the main door. Siwoo, however, made it clear he was not interested in that kind of merchandise, and stated that the group would split into 4 teams. Right after, they beat up the two young men and tied them up, since they had been planning to break into the warehouse. Even so, the protagonist remained uncertain about the best approach. He didn't know whether they should pretend to be addicts to infiltrate, or if the best option was to eliminate everyone at once. Hua agreed that, given the situation, the best choice really was to eliminate them all. And so, Siwoo activated his octation ability, a technique whose efficiency depended on the summoner's mastery and knowledge. Since he possessed this skill at S rank, that was not a problem. After all, he was known as Korea's archmage. Even acknowledging that his brother Sejun had grown considerably in power, it still bothered him. He didn't want to be treated like a child. They entered the place taking advantage of the festive environment. There were several people moving around, many of them producers, but most seemed to be ordinary citizens. In the end, they realized they were not dealing with criminals, but with a black market divided in two. One was aimed at ordinary people, while the other was for awakeners, the latter being much harder to find. Spying on that environment could provide valuable clues, but suddenly they heard a desperate scream. It was a man suffering from severe hallucinations, something common among those who descended through portals. The place itself seemed cursed. Siwoo told the others to stay alert, while he went to investigate alone. During his search, he found an underground tunnel, likely used as an escape route whenever the police showed up. The path was narrow and confusing, but he sensed an unfamiliar energy there. It wasn't mana, but something he couldn't name. As he advanced, a spirit suddenly appeared behind him. Thinking it was a ghost, Siwoo instinctively used his powers, startled by the sudden apparition. However, he soon realized the entity carried no malice or intent to harm. At that moment, a blonde girl with blue eyes appeared, and asked him not to hurt her friend. Siwoo was surprised to notice that she could see him even with his octation skill activated. Intrigued, he wanted to know who this girl was, but she also wanted to know who he was. She explained that the place was her home, which confused the protagonist, who disagreed, saying that a sewer couldn't be anyone's home. When he asked about her parents, the girl revealed that she had no peace there. She had been traded for powder. Her wounds were the result of failed attempts to escape in search of food. Siwoo quickly healed her. Sion was shocked by the power she felt, describing it as warm, unlike her own, which was very cold. That was when the protagonist realized she possessed a rare ability. She could make ghosts visible. According to her, the spirits protected her, warning her when men were coming so she could hide in time. They also showed her every exit in the labyrinth. Siwoo asked her name, and she replied that it was Sion. He then asked for her help in finding men with strange powers, and she eagerly accepted, happy to have finally received help. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the place, Siwoo, disguised, displayed a product that was 100% pure, imported directly from the abyss, without any impurities. It was extremely rare and hard to obtain. He offered it to a red-haired man, not knowing that it had severe side effects. However, a loud noise interrupted the negotiation. Curious, Siwoo went to check and saw a bloodstain shaped like a hand on the door. Alarmed, they realized it wasn't the work of a ghost, but of the real Siwoo himself. The protagonist protagonist acted swiftly. He knocked down the two men and told Sion to hide, promising to talk to her once everything was over. Facing the enemies, he said he wanted to take a look at that mysterious product. But before any reaction, the two men fainted instantly. Soon after, Siwoo was ambushed by a man who kicked him in the back, knocking him down. The others present couldn't understand how he had managed to get there. They began to suspect that addicts had leaked information about the place. Among themselves, they referred to each other by numbers. One of the men, his face covered in scars, ordered them to get rid of Siwoo's body, assuming he was dead. Unfortunately for them, Siwoo was still alive. With speed, he counterattacked, though the enemies dodged, giving him time to get back on his feet, ready to continue the fight. By the way, they panicked at his counterattack. The protagonist realized they had combat training and experience. He grew curious about where they came from. The scarred man soon noticed that Siwoo was no ordinary person, as he had recovered from the previous blow without injury. He tried to attack again, but Siwoo used his ability, restraining the enemies with ease. Firmly, he demanded answers, threatening to crush them if they didn't cooperate. The scarred man asked Siwoo to calm down, pretending to want to negotiate, but soon launched a powerful attack known as the Lion's Roar, forcing the protagonist to release the captured men. Even so, Siwoo made it clear he didn't believe the act. The fallen men tried to uncover his identity, but they didn't hold out for long and decided to use the illegal enhancement product to boost their powers. After consuming it, they recovered quickly and showed new determination to crush him. The protagonist was surprised to see their powers had indeed increased. They threatened to blow a hole in his head, but Siwoo dodged all their attacks with ease, questioning whether they were truly incapable of living without relying on those products. At that moment, the scarred man managed to restrain him. Siwoo then realized the others were plotting something. The group's leader ordered the fighters identified as number 4 and number 10 to completely destroy him. However, Hua appeared just in time, intervening with her special ability, the Wind Flower Wolf. She struck the enemies' heads directly and irritably, declared that she also wanted to take part in the battle. Observing the field, she noticed that the drugged men were abnormally strong, but she affirmed that against an S-rank hunter, they were still no threat. Moments later, they were all lying on the ground. Siwoo wanted to know how Hua had managed to get there, and discovered it was Sun who had shown her the way. The protagonist was very grateful for the little girl's help, but emphasized that it was not safe for a child to live in such a place. It was the first time they had seen users of illegal enhancement products acting on Korean soil, which made the situation even stranger. Siwoo believed that, just like the GWI Saldan group made up of extremely strong men used to slaughter these men, had also been sent directly from the place where the products were manufactured, functioning almost like an assassination squad. It reminded him a lot of the group known as Beast. That's why he suspected demons were behind the incident, since everything seemed to go beyond human limits. Perhaps even humans from the backworld were conspiring with them. On the other hand, Hua found it very strange that the name Mad Dog had disappeared from collective memory over the last 10 years. For her, regardless of time, he was still one of Korea's 3 lords. In the end, they all concluded that this could grow into the seed of a new war between humans and demons. Siwoo also noticed that the enemies used numbers as code names, and that at least 10 were involved, of whom 2 were still alive. At that moment, Sonu appeared to warn that everyone was in danger. Suddenly, a huge explosion engulfed the place. Chiwoo appeared, declaring that they should have eliminated all their opponents. According to him, by leaving survivors, they had created openings, and now he would show them how a real job should be done. He was not alone. Other enemies accompanied him, and their arrival left Siwoo visibly concerned, since the mana level of this new group was clearly higher than that of the previous opponents. At the very least, they were A rank. Siwoo asked if he was their leader, but Chiwoo only replied that it didn't matter, because everyone there was going to die anyway. Sejun volunteered to guard the rear while Hua prepared her cover with arrows. The protagonist then faced Chiwoo directly and realized that the martial arts the enemy used looked like child's play, completely ineffective. Irritated, Chiwoo launched an attack, but Hua, acting with precision, fired a perfect arrow that struck him. However, the enemy's strength recovered almost instantly. A blindfolded man warned him not to get distracted. At that moment, Sejun stepped in to support Hua, saying that the most important thing now was to deal with the other fighters first. But Siwoo's body radiated confidence. He assured his companions that he would finish the fight in just 10 minutes. Siwoo charged at Chiwoo, landing several blows while questioning him, intrigued by the enemy's ability, which seemed to gather the energy of received attacks and return it in a counterstrike. It was a kind of reversal skill, but the protagonist declared that it would no longer work. The real problem was Chiwoo's speed, so high that it was almost impossible to keep up. Then, to everyone's surprise, the protagonist revealed he had reached the level of Asura. He explained that this was only natural, since that technique had been created by him in the first place. Siwoo said that mana could manifest in many forms, depending on how the individual used their dungeon, and he had never imagined Asura would spread so far as to become a separate school. Realizing the vast difference in power, Chiwoo could could only think about finding a chance to retreat and warn number 1. But as he ran, the protagonist warned him not to lose focus and immediately struck him with brutal force, slamming him hard against the wall. Since he had already answered Siwoo's question, the protagonist decided it was now his turn to ask, as Chiwoo was the only one still alive there. Chiwoo, on the other hand, wanted to know the protagonist's identity. He tried to retaliate, reminding him that it had once been the trafficker himself who bragged about his new product. Then he poured that product into the protagonist's mouth, which to Siwoo was nothing more than a false medicine. The criminal preached his own philosophy, claiming that the world revolved around the strength of awakened abilities, and that all who desired such power would eventually be consumed by it. According to this logic, the products would keep appearing, and the weak would always be destined to be devoured by the strong. The protagonist, however, did not care about the enemy's ideology. He only wanted an answer, and before Siwoo could be completely consumed by the effects of the drug, he demanded to know who had manufactured that illegal enhancement product. Meanwhile, Sejun observed from a distance and realized that the protagonist was different from 10 years ago. He was stronger, colder, and more relentless. For Sejun, only 10 years had passed, but in the other realm, Chiwoo had lived 100 long years, and it was natural that his personality had changed drastically. Chiwoo explained that distribution of the product had begun simultaneously in several places, focusing mainly on Asia and China. But before he could reveal more details, the enemies blew themselves up, victims of a mana oath, a pact that silenced them. Unable to obtain further information, they decided to leave, taking the girl with them, seeking a safe place where she could be cared for. Meanwhile, in Narek's private club, Zhang Chuan could not believe what had happened at the abandoned warehouse. Most of the GWI Saldan members had lost contact, and Siwoo was still anxious, since he followed Dace's direct orders. This left Zhang Chuan deeply irritated, as he had planned to return to headquarters the next day. During a call with Daesung, he demanded an explanation of what was happening. Daesung revealed that the product had been launched simultaneously in several regions, and that the counterfeit faction was aware of it. In fact, they themselves had leaked the information to HMCS. Zhang Chuan was confused, but he heard that the product was already spreading through the country, and that it was only a matter of time before they gained total control. They had prepared several decoys to facilitate this advance. HMCS continued to investigate the abandoned warehouse, but Zhang Chen considered everything very risky and feared they would be discovered soon. However, Dan reminded him that all those involved who had died had made a mana oath, ensuring total silence. That eliminated the risk of leaks. All that was left for Zhang Chen was to protect Narek's territory. Many sellers, distributors, and addicts were captured inside the abandoned factory, and the sales site was destroyed. In any other situation, this would have been considered a great victory. However, not everyone directly involved in the production and sale of those illegal products had been eliminated. At the HMCS branch office, irritation was clear. The manager was confused by the fact that some criminals had simply blown themselves up, making it impossible to gather further information. Still, they managed to recover part of the product in its original form, and confirmed that the distribution network came from China, which represented an important breakthrough. Even with that, the manager remained deeply frustrated, since headquarters had its eyes fixed on the Korean branch. They already had a sample of the product, but still couldn't identify its components. Without this detail, confronting the Chinese branch became nearly impossible. Ambitious, the manager wasn't thinking about justice, but only about his own promotion within the company. Meanwhile, Siwoo's whereabouts were questioned, as he had taken the day off to handle personal matters. In truth, the protagonist was with Hua and Sejun, as they were all determined to take care of the little girl. They had even visited some places looking for a safe home for her, but since she was awakened, her adaptation would be very difficult. Finally, Sejun gifted the protagonist with a house, and he clearly remembered the child's excitement upon seeing the size of her new home. Daesu was also nearby, but could not understand why they remained so united when the real goal should have been to drive out the demons. The truth was that the protagonist wanted to protect everyone around him. He planned to keep everyone within arm's reach because that was his true belief. For 100 years, he had endured loneliness in another realm and, in the end, had failed to protect anyone. That was why now he wished for everything to be different. In his heart, he believed that Frey would be very surprised when he awakened. That night, Siwoo was on a call with Junggu, who explained that demons used mana in patterns different from humans. To claim they were involved just because of demonic energy was an exaggeration. Even if that kind of energy was used, it was no longer so rare on Earth. One only had to access the celestial darkness to obtain it. Moreover, directly mentioning demons was extremely delicate. No country wanted to expose itself or cause diplomatic issues over mere rumors. Still, the protagonist believed that the involvement of half-demons in the production of all that was directly tied to that energy, even though no new leads had been found. With no contact with Pandemonium, the investigation ended up being postponed. He suspected that Min Jun might be researching demonic energy on his own. At some point, he tried to look up information online, but, unfortunately, only found a private blog. That was when Sion suddenly appeared, saying the ghosts had told her everything. The protagonist found that to be a huge invasion of privacy, but the girl revealed she had overheard it all while hiding in the sewers. She explained that Zhang Chuen had arrived in the country, that the goods were in Narak, and would soon spread across the entire territory. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a young man was running desperately until he was brutally thrown against a wall. Two men abused him just because he was of a lower rank. To them, the boy was nothing but useless. Cornered and consumed by fear, he tried to ingest an illegal enhancement product. However, his body could not withstand it. He exploded right there, revealing just how dangerous the substance was. That made it clear a new threat was beginning to emerge. At the HMCS headquarters, the emergency manager presented the case to everyone, stressing that the initial suppression was essential. According to him, if they didn't contain it quickly, the situation would spread like wildfire. They also wanted updates about an incident that had occurred in an abandoned factory of the Korean branch, but the official response was that no major discoveries had been made. Even so, comments surfaced that one of the hunters involved was close to the vice president. When analyzing the data, speculations began that the main distribution hub in Asia might be in China. However, they claimed this was only a rumor, coming from a low-level employee making reckless statements. The alleged connection with the vice president sounded odd, as if he were trying to continue the former president's legacy. For some, it was too risky to let the Hunters Investigation Agency be driven purely by ambition surrounding gate-related business. The manager of the Korean branch, on the other hand, thought those criticisms were too harsh. He believed the vice president must have had his reasons. In the end, they all decided to trust the way the Korean branch was handling the case of illegal products tied to awakened ones. Later, at the Korean HMCS headquarters, the team leader found it strange that the investigation had been announced so publicly. To him, it seemed like nothing more than a smokescreen. Even so, Siwoo ordered them to investigate Narak, explaining that this name had been part of the testimony of a child found in the abandoned factory. Although they didn't know where the place was, he was certain that Narak would be an important keyword. The team leader expressed frustration. The country was too big, and if that place dealt with illegal items, it probably had no official records. They might be using only code names. Still, the protagonist decided to push the investigation forward. He planned to analyze the country's 7 main guilds and request cooperation from the heptagram, all under strict confidentiality, at least for the time being. Even though he was reluctant, the leader admitted it would not be easy to achieve that. But the protagonist had already lost his patience. He ordered them to make the necessary calls immediately, as he would handle the cleanup himself. Meanwhile, at the presidential office in Cheongwadae, Jillian, the current master of the Menso Guild, was present to address the matter. The HMCS had requested the cooperation of all guilds, including the heptagram, making it clear that the situation was on the verge of becoming a large-scale crisis. The president considered such a move very bold. To him, an investigation agency that barked too loudly usually didn't bite. Still, he acknowledged that Jillian could act however she wished. After all, that guild was hers. However, in the end, she sent a handwritten refusal. The message made it clear that her massive guild was excluded from the operation, but authorized the others, including Cold Soul, to cooperate as long as they could provide materials related to the case. The team leader believed that all guilds would refuse, except for Shionada Empire. When Siwoo arrived at the site, he expressed curiosity about the transfer of guild hunters to the HMCS, and discovered that this was more common than expected. Despite the salaries and benefits being lower compared to large guilds, some hunters saw HMCS as a mission of public interest. Still, the protagonist reinforced the need to watch Diamond and White Lion, since there was a possibility someone inside the agency was leaking information. The team leader, however, did not see a direct connection between HMCS and the guilds, as long as they cooperated. He pointed out that the distributors' profits were enormous, and that the scale of the investigation was already significant. Thus, there was a strong chance that an organization as large as a guild was directly involved. Moreover, the cooperation request sent to HMCS seemed too one-sided. It would be odd for them to accept without hidden benefits or some form of pressure. Shortly after, a girl with glasses entered the room, saying she might have found the presumed location of Narak. At the same time, an HMCS staff member was in direct contact with Zhang Chuan, revealing they had found a lead connected to Ganguk. This man was cooperating far more than expected, even handing over a list of the names of investigators who had been sent to the abandoned factory incident. Zhang Chuan couldn't understand that behavior, since until then, the Korean HMCS had proven completely completely incompetent. They were about to speed up their business, but now the Korean branch was moving forward far too quickly. That was why Zhang Chun demanded the exact date of the invasion. The staff member, however, said he didn't know anything for certain. He had only heard rumors that a special team was being assembled. The informant also mentioned that one of the investigators had ties to the vice president of headquarters, having been placed there as a parachute. Zhang Chun promised immediate payment if he managed to gather more information. He then handed the list of investigators to Shiru, asking him to check each name and verify the situation. Although he understood the young man's thirst for revenge over his brother's death, he advised him to be patient, as a major event was approaching. Soon, there would be a perfect opportunity to act. After all, the HMCS already knew about Narek's existence. In District 20 of China, a masked man, a clown, avoided long conversations with Zhang Chun, staying focused on his own business. The Korean man went straight to the point, saying that Narek had been discovered, and that the incident at the factory showed the Korean HMCS was advancing in a concerning way. To him, the local informant was no longer enough. He needed help. However, the masked man thought the profits were too low to justify a business trip just to cover tracks. In his view, the best course of action was to pull out all the goods and abandon the base entirely. But Zhang Chun insisted that losing Narek would be a disaster. Even if another structure could be built, none could compare to that base's distribution system. The masked man then decided to seek out Daesung. As he approached, he was surprised by the imposing nature of the place and greeted him for the first time, reporting that Narek had been discovered and that the Korean HMCS was advancing far beyond expectations, posing a risk to everyone involved. Daesung, however, had no patience for games. He knew that clown well, the Korean merchant, and he also knew he was part of the same group, pressuring him to supply illegal products. If he truly wanted to step into the underworld, he would have to go through him. Deep down, Daesung only saw it as a toll. As long as his own goals were met, he cared little for the rest. The clown, on the other hand, wanted to spread the products. But even knowing Daesung was a central figure in the underworld, he was aware the Chinese HMCS was no scarecrow. If they were discovered, it would be a massive problem. On top of that, there was the investigation requested by the heptagram, making the case even more delicate. The central point was that soon, an unprecedented meeting would take place. Organizations from several East Asian countries would be summoned for a conference in Narek. The call was far too important for any of them to refuse. During the event, new products could be launched, and even a special promotion offered. There would also be enough force to wipe out any secret investigation team daring to infiltrate. Even so, Daesung believed the clown would not abandon his base so easily. He bet that before leaving, he would cause some sort of disturbance. Cleaning that place up would be extremely difficult. The clown merely promised he was the kind who developed everything he was given. That was why he only wanted Daesung's cooperation to achieve his goals. Then his memories overwhelmed him. He remembered the girl lying in a hospital bed. It was for her that he did all of this. There had been promises that he would get the money to heal her, and that was all that mattered. The clown's desire to become the strongest of all was born from that old dream, protecting the girl he loved. He believed that once she got better, the two of them could return to China together and start a new life. However, in her last breath, she said she didn't need money. What she truly wanted was for them to be a happy family next time. Right after those words, she passed away. The memory of that scene still haunted him. He also remembered the day he asked to become Siwoo's disciple, willing to pursue power at any cost. He believed that with strength, he could protect those he loved. Among all the people he had ever met, the protagonist was, without a doubt, the strongest. To surpass him was the only way never to lose what was precious again. But now, all of that felt like foolish sentimentality. He had become strong. He had more money than he could ever spend. And still, there was nothing left he wished to protect in this world. Determined, he summoned a subordinate and ordered him to notify every organization that a conference would soon be held in Korea. Meanwhile, at the Korean HMCS headquarters, a strategic meeting was being conducted about the incidents linked to Narek. The protagonist would personally assume command of the investigation and made it clear that any complaints could be taken directly to headquarters. On the meeting room board, the image of an identified location was displayed. An exclusive members only resort in Incheon, also known as Narek. That was the main distribution hub of illegal products for awakened individuals across all of Asia. The operator behind the scheme remained unknown, using only a false foreign name as a facade. What was known, however, was that the distributors were aware of the investigation network, significantly increasing the possibility of an infiltrator within HMCS itself. With authorization from headquarters, only verified top members would take part in the operation. The mission was classified as strictly confidential. The goal was simple and direct: destroy Narek with a single strike. The place place was heavily protected under the guise of a luxury resort and was guarded by countless security personnel. The analysis of membership records showed that many recent entrants had direct ties to criminal organizations. It was highly likely that among them were seasoned underworld enforcers, prepared for any contingency except for the HMCS agents assigned to the operation. The mission's details would be kept under total secrecy. Even guildmasters who had pledged support would only learn the date and time on the very day of the strike. Because this was a special operation, the masters of the Qianghua Empire were excluded. They already had prior knowledge of the illegal product's existence, due to an overseas incident long before it began spreading across Korea. For that reason, even though Siwoo had requested their cooperation during the abandoned factory case, the name of the operation remained restricted: Doberman. As the plans were being explained, 3 guild representatives gathered. One of them complained about HMCS demanding cooperation, despite being a public institution. To him, they weren't cheap soldiers to be summoned like that. The other 2, however, reminded him that, in the end, this was work of public interest. Even so, they acknowledged the situation was uncomfortable. It was at that moment the protagonist entered the room. Seeing how far the preparations had advanced, he introduced himself as the direct commander of the operation, and handed over a formal document with a clear objective: eradicate the trafficking of illegal products for awakened individuals. He stated that the exact date and location would be announced within a week of confirmation, and requested that one of those present prepare a separate team, ready to be deployed at any moment. He also reinforced that it would be better if the guild masters themselves took part directly. The representative who had been complaining until then began to show curiosity. He recognized the protagonist as the man who had cleared an entire tower in just 5 days. He was also shocked to learn that he was the hunter who had disappeared 10 years ago. His curiosity grew stronger and stronger, but the protagonist quickly cut off that enthusiasm. He simply said he was a newcomer, and that his personal story had nothing to do with the investigation. Immediately afterward, he left the room, ordering them to contact him as soon as the forces were ready. Meanwhile, at the Japanese branch of HMCS, new illegal products had been found in Moten's garden, indicating that the criminal network was even larger than anyone had imagined. Hikari warned that they needed to contain the spread of the problem as soon as possible, before it spiraled out of control like wildfire. The investigation revealed the name Akai Kitsune as one of those involved, but the issue was that he was no longer in the country. To make matters worse, many leaders of large-scale criminal organizations had disappeared in recent days, raising suspicions of even deeper and more dangerous connections. Believing it was time to repay her debt, Hikari asked Kumo to prepare for departure. At the airport, the protagonist met with Lila and Hikari, while on the other side of the world, in Narak, the atmosphere was entirely different. People in Narak arrived, excited about rumors of an extraordinary new product, supposedly capable of generating unimaginable profits. For many, this didn't seem like an exaggeration, since Daesung was known for his influence and would not involve himself in anything without potential. However, some of the more perceptive doubted the information. They found it impossible that Daesung had accomplished everything alone and began to suspect the hidden presence of the clown. The confirmation that the Black Mamba had been killed by HMCS only heightened the tension among those present. Many began to believe that this was the perfect moment to officially flood the market with the new product. Even knowing they were under investigation and that Narak had already been exposed, pressure mounted, and tension among those present started to spiral out of control. Inside Narak's territory, many who had gathered there didn't even know each other. Tensions escalated until a young man approached another, making it clear that this was Kitsune's territory, and that newcomers without reputation shouldn't try to seize high positions. The response came in the form of a devastating punch, showing no one there was playing games. At that moment, Shiwu arrived, ordering everyone inside immediately. Whoever disobeyed would be excluded from the meeting. The hall then fell into silence until the clown entered calmly and introduced himself. He explained that everyone had been summoned there by Daesung and revealed the true reason for the gathering: a new special enhancement product for awakened ones, called Lux, capable of doubling or even quadrupling the mana of those who used it. The clown admitted there were unpleasant rumors about side effects, but assured them those issues belonged to old prototypes. The problems had already been resolved, and now what mattered was negotiation. He reminded them that HMCS headquarters had been investigating Lux since its early stages, and that grand enterprises always carried great risks. The Korean HMCS, in fact, already had informants infiltrated in Narak, and for the launch to succeed, everyone needed to cooperate. Many present didn't take his words seriously, believing the Korean HMCS was far too weak to pose any real threat. The clown, however, stated that things were changing. He admitted that in the past, his enemies had ignored him, but now there was a real possibility of a large-scale attack Narak within a week. For that reason, he asked for everyone's cooperation in preparing a glorious counterattack. The merchants didn't understand why they should protect Narak since they wouldn't profit directly from it. To convince them, the clown offered double the lux for the price of one, along with additional bonuses depending on each one's level of contribution. He clarified that this was a direct request from Daizong, and refusal was not an option. In the end, he declared that, survive or not, Narak would become the turning point of the underworld, for Lux had the potential to change everything overnight. The choice of whether to participate or not would be theirs. To him, the true strength of humans didn't lie in the brute force obtained from the gates, but in the deep desires that drove them. Outside, at midnight sharp, Siwoo observed the control tower from a distance, and wanted to know if his team was ready. Everyone was waiting only for his command. Then, the protagonist raised his hand and activated his ability, Meteor Rain, launching it directly at the building. Operation Doberman had begun. Meanwhile, inside the hall, the guests were still drinking and celebrating. Zhang Quan praised the clown's work, who had been successfully distributing stock, controlling mercenaries, and even planting agents inside HMCS. The masked man, however, credited all the success to Daesung's cooperation. With the product already delivered, Zhang Quan announced he would return to China, as, in his words, he was not a good fighter, and his presence there was no longer necessary. Chiwoo planned to leave with the others after meeting Daesung, but before he could make any decision, a powerful explosion shook the building. One subordinate rushed in panic, announcing that a bombing had struck the outer part of the structure. The main hall was in ruins, and the entrance was blocked. The protagonist was scolded, as he had promised the operation would take place a week later, but now he was demanding immediate action. Because of this, the White Lion Guild refused to take part in the offensive. Even so, the group decided to proceed with the plan. The protective and detection barriers surrounding Narak were activated, and the strike team broke through the first-floor entrance of the hall. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, and the protagonist felt satisfied, as the operation's date had not been leaked. The only problem was the unexpected presence of the Warborn, who had appeared disguised among the allies. Even so, the surprise attack was a success. Escape routes were blocked. Smoke rose, and the enemies would be forced out of hiding. In the lobby, the awakened ones found were, at most, rank A Siwoo's team, then began swiftly capturing anyone who tried to flee. That was when one of the merchants summoned a creature made of purple sludge and hurled it at the hunters. Convinced that with just that, he had already defeated them all, Yohua was left unsure of how to react to that scene. But Sijun, realizing the danger, understood that if that creature exploded, it would cause a disaster. He quickly froze the monster with his ability, turning it into solid stone. Yohua, with her bow, fired a windflower arrow, which exploded with great force among the enemies. One of the men present immediately recognized their strength and declared that they were facing S-rank hunters from Korea. For Daesung, it was clear that Narak was on the verge of collapse. Perhaps the clown's plan B had failed, and since the mistake was his personal responsibility, many didn't want to get involved. The clown then, in desperation, began moving the products hastily through secret tunnels. That would be his perfect escape route. Chaos consumed Narak, and everyone present began evacuating quickly. For many, this marked the end of Akai Kitsune. The Kitsune men were shocked when they recognized the Korean S-rank hunters. Without enough soldiers to resist, they decided to retreat and regroup with other factions, as leaving on their own would be suicide. Akai Kitsune himself chose to open a path for his people. Sijun noticed the man's absurd speed and called Nona, who swiftly drew her sword and intercepted the movement, forcing Akai Kitsune to stop. In Narak's upper levels, chaos reigned. People ran in desperation, trying to escape, while a frenzied young man attacked anyone who crossed his path. Many carried crates of the product, and it was in this scenario that Hikari appeared, knocking several down at once. Beside her was Kumo, and the huntress demanded that the criminals surrender immediately. All of them were on the international wanted list. Capturing them would be a memorable achievement for the entire team. She ordered her allies to capture as many fugitives as possible. But at that moment, reinforcements arrived. Chiwoo appeared alongside a woman dressed in red. Their presence temporarily balanced the fight. The pair's outfits caught Hikari's attention, and she immediately recognized the symbol of the organization led by Daesung. Seeing a unique opportunity, Hikari decided to test her new legendary artifact. She then summoned the flame spirit, Kagutsushi. Alongside him was also her spiritual gift, forming a powerful duo. The organization's members mocked the scene, saying it looked like a zoo. Irritated, Hikari shot back, declaring that they were not animals but divine spirits. She charged at the woman in red. Kumo, distracted while glancing at his sister, ended up being attacked by Chiwoo but managed to block the strike. Even so, he felt the brutal weight of the blow. In response, he spread energy around to push the enemies back. The woman in red, now furious, swore to kill Hikari with her next attack. However, Siwoo's partner had not yet unleashed her full power. She activated Kagutsushi's blooming ability, causing multiple flaming copies to emerge around her. Siwoo, trying to protect the woman in red, absorbed the attack's energy and redirected it back against their opponents. Hikari was struck directly by the counterattack, as she hadn't expected it to happen so suddenly. At that instant, the protagonist appeared and quickly healed her wounds. Upon seeing this, Siwoo recognized his face. It was the man who had killed his brother. Overcome with hatred, he put on his sunglasses, ingested a dose of Lux, and swore on his twin brother's soul that he would turn the protagonist into dust. He charged at Siwoo in fury, but Siwoo only found his reaction overly dramatic and exaggerated. With precision, Siwoo struck directly at Chiwoo's arm, channeling his energy accurately, which completely destabilized the enemy. Meanwhile, Aram explained to Kai's that the escape route was secured, and that they should leave immediately. Kai's, observing the fight between the protagonist and the others, ordered the green-haired woman, Raban, to stay behind to assist the clown, since that man must not die yet. On the other side, Zhang Chuen watched the battle from afar, and bitterly regretted following Chiwoo there. He couldn't believe Chiwoo had lost control so easily, attacking blindly. Concerned, he observed the protagonist, trying to understand who this man was, someone who seemed to be toying with a fighter on the level of an S-rank hunter, while desperately searching for a way to escape. Soon after, Siwoo brought Chiwoo down, and Hikari thanked him, saying she was indebted to him once again. But Siwoo disagreed, since her help would be essential at that moment. He hadn't expected so many enemies gathered in that place. Hikari explained that Chiwoo was a high-ranking member of the Azure Blossom organization, a powerful underworld group in East Asia. Even so, Chiwoo found it all very strange, since the enemies didn't seem prepared for an ambush. Moreover, the products were out of place. At that moment, Layla activated a detection barrier around the building, but ended up giving away her legendary artifact, which significantly increased her mana recovery. She admitted that, seeing everything in action, she realized how complacent she had been with herself, and promised to dedicate herself much more from then on. She also said she was glad to have received a support request from Sed, although she still felt she needed to work much harder. Kumo was surprised by his sister's words, and even suspected she might be interested in Siwoo, but in truth, it was just gratitude. Even so, when the protagonist passed close to her, the girl visibly blushed. He, however, paid little attention to it, as his focus was on finding Zhang Chun, whom he located trying to hide. As he approached, Siwoo asked if he wanted to die right there. Zhang Chun was desperate, claiming he wasn't an awakened, just an ordinary citizen. The protagonist, however, wasn't moved. To him, Zhang Chun was just a coward serving criminals. Pressured, the man ended up revealing that the products were stored in the basement, accessed through a VIP-only elevator located on the top floor, and that he himself had evacuated the entire stock to that location. The revelation deeply annoyed the protagonist, who immediately contacted Siwoo and Yohua. The two rushed toward the indicated place and, along the way, found countless bodies on the ground. Further ahead, Aram and Robin were blocking the path entirely. Sejun felt the weight of their presence and realized that both were on a level completely different from any of the opponents they had faced so far. They might even be stronger than Yohua and himself combined. Aram and Rabin were there to stop Siwoo and Yohua, buying time until the clown arrived. Rabin wasted no time and hurled a weapon at the mage, who immediately reacted with a blazing ability, intending to finish them both at once. But Aram countered with mastery, reversing the spell and triggering a colossal explosion that forced both sides to retreat. Rabin, seizing the opening, appeared behind the redhead, mocking her for being just an archer and promising to break her like a fragile sugar cookie. However, what he did not expect was Yohua raising her bow firmly to block the axe. Mentally, she responded to the insult, thinking that the true essence of an archer was not in distance, but in strength. With that, she counterattacked with precision, forcing Raban to back off. At that moment, the clown arrived, visibly irritated. His plan was simple: ensure the safe removal of the products. However, he now found himself trapped in a battle right in the middle of the escape route. His presence distracted Sejun and Yohua, allowing them both to be struck by combined attacks. It was then that the clown realized all of this had been a direct order from Case, just when they had decided to prioritize the products, unluckily for them. The protagonist arrived just in time. Chiwoo declared that no one would leave that place alive. The clown, in a sarcastic tone, congratulated him on the surprise attack and admitted that he had brought down that fortress. But he promised to rebuild everything in another base. For him, the only problem was the money invested in that place. And to make matters worse, he revealed that his allies were keeping Sejun and Yohua occupied. At that moment, the protagonist grew alarmed. Raven tried to attack him with all his strength, but Siwoo responded with his iron fist, striking Raven squarely. The impact was so devastating that a single blow completely brought him down. Frightened, Aram begged the clown to retreat, for now. But the masked man, now aware of the protagonist's true identity, only smiled and said he wanted to talk to him. Siwoo, however, had no patience left for any sort of conversation and charged directly at him. The clown dodged with surprising speed, but was still caught by a swift counterattack that tore part of his mask. The masked man hadn't expected to be wounded so soon. Irritated, he began to attack with nearly impossible speed to follow. The protagonist, however, seemed to be enjoying the fight. He was deceiving the enemy, waiting for the right moment until he landed a violent kick on the clown's back, immediately freezing him afterward. But Siwoo also felt the side effects of dimensional travel, and his mind began to wonder when all of this would end. Sejun, seeing his brother weakened, pleaded for him to stop and allow himself to be healed. Arum, observing everything, was certain that man was a direct threat to Pandemonium and needed to be reported to headquarters at once. However, the instant she tried to move, the protagonist intercepted her and ordered her to stay exactly where she was. He pressed the woman, demanding to know the origin of those products. Even if he thought she was just a pawn, he threatened to cut her into pieces if she didn't answer. Suddenly, the clown unleashed extreme heat, completely melting the ice that held him. Laughing at the situation, for the first time he revealed a true ability, something he had hidden until then. And if it was a fight, he declared he would turn everyone there into ashes. Aram was outraged by this, as until that moment she believed she had been on his side. Siwoo, not understanding the reason for her indignation, forcibly lowered the temperature with his ice, and sent the masked man flying away. To him, that man had simply wasted mana, but in truth, it was part of the enemy's plan. The clown had connected himself to the protagonist during the attack. Siwoo realized he couldn't move his body. The masked man laughed loudly, explaining with delight what was happening. His fire wasn't ordinary magic. His ability was called Flame Infiltration, a power that connected the target's unique life force directly to his spirit, and it was something that could never be extinguished. For ordinary humans, it was practically impossible to materialize spirits, but the clown knew Siwoo was a rare spirit summoner. In his twisted mind, he saw the protagonist as a mad dog, drooling while playing with forces he barely understood. He wanted to reduce Siwoo to ashes, consuming his precious life force. But Siwoo did not back down. On the contrary, he wanted to see how far the clown would go, so he drove a brutal punch into the enemy's abdomen. Even with his body being consumed by flames, he believed that if he could bring the clown down there, he could change the course of everything. And so, he began striking blow after blow, each heavier and more precise than the last. The enemy, however, was not giving in. He managed to recover at an abnormal speed, even as his mana drained at a terrifying rate. The effort demanded by his own ability forced him into a more defensive stance, but for the clown, that hardly mattered. The longer the fight went on, the faster the protagonist's body would burn. Siwoo had already noticed something since his return to Earth. The side effects of dimensional travel limited the release of energy, as if his own body had activated an automatic protection mechanism. All the mana he had accumulated in his 100 years in another dimension was still there, intact, but the magical framework of that world was incompatible with this one. The methods of manipulation were as different as Earth and sky. His body had imposed limits to avoid overload, and when the time came to break that barrier, there would only be one way: to shatter the force that sustained it, exploding his own core. He already understood how he could do it, but he also knew the consequences would be unpredictable. At that instant, he thought of Frey, but was interrupted when the clown charged to finish him off. The protagonist leapt back, and Aram, deeply distressed, realized that he was willing to break through his own limits. To her, this was no longer about Lux, but about the real risks Siwoo posed. And since she followed Kai's orders, she concluded that he had to be kept alive. She tried to act, but found Sejun behind her, ensuring that she would do nothing. He declared that the abyss was already surrounded inside and out, and that most of the suspects had been captured. Only one choice remained: surrender. Meanwhile, the clown kept mocking the situation, saying he wanted the hunter to feel what it was like to burn his own life as fuel. He spoke his final words as if Siwoo were already defeated. The protagonist knew he wasn't entirely wrong. His healing was already slowing down, and if things went on like that, the clown would also consume himself first. But Siwoo was also reaching his limit, and his companion still needed his healing ability. If he released everything at once, he risked destroying the entire building with a devastating overload. It was at that moment that Frey finally appeared. A voice echoed clearly in his mind, saying there was no reason to fear. He had descended there to break through everything on his own. With that, Siwoo felt truly relieved. The clown was immediately confused. He couldn't comprehend the magnitude of the energy before him. Then, Frey materialized, devouring the enemy's extreme heat as if it were a banquet. For the first time, the masked man showed genuine concern. This had now become a battle of life and death. While the clown was lost in doubt, Siwoo didn't even bother to explain. He wanted him to feel firsthand what it meant to face such a force. And it was at that instant that Aram, driven by Kaisa's will within Pandemonium, made her final decision. She transferred the coordinates of her ability to her own body. In the blink of an eye, she and the clown disappeared completely, using a technique called spiritual beast escape, sacrificing a subordinate in the process, and escaping in a calculated manner. After that, only silence remained. The storm was over. Siwoo immediately looked towards Sejun, checking if his brother was alright. Sejun simply adjusted his glasses, still with a serious expression, and asked what the hell that thing next to his brother was. Siwoo just smiled, saying he'd rather leave that explanation for later. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to follow the upcoming chapters. Your support is very important for the series to keep growing.